and Mr. Rahul Tongia, Senior Fellow, Center for Social and Economic Progress. The floor is yours, Sunita ji. Thank you.
So this session is also being live streamed, right? So firstly, let me join Nivit and my colleagues to welcome all of you to our campus. I'm really delighted to have all of you. And as Nivit also confessed, and he's one of my dearest, oldest colleagues, so he has an ability to be very frank and brutal, which I really respect and I really, really, really value it. He is absolutely right. How do you organize a conference on renewable energy when everybody is talking about it? And we needed to find a way in which we could have a conversation. And this is why we deliberately did not do the meeting in Delhi. We called you all to our campus because this campus provides a space where we can have a dialogue. And the idea is not to disagree. The idea is to have different points of view, because we are on the journey together. We have the same objective. Every one of us in this room has exactly the same objective. We want to make the green transition happen. And we want to make it happen. And let me open my presentation. Lakhinder, kaun sa wala hai mera? We want to make the green transition happen for a particular objective. And today I want to begin my presentation by reminding us that this green transition is not about energy infrastructure. It is actually about creating and winning the battle on two fronts. The battle on climate change, which is an existential threat, too much complication. You've also got it live stream, too much. Well, no, but this is not my first. So let me go back. Okay. So as I said, I want to begin, and this conversation we will have with everyone on this panel are experts, but they're also very dear friends and people who have worked in this field forever. So this idea is to take this opportunity to listen to them, and then I will make sure we have time for a conversation. But I want to remind us, why are we doing renewable energy? We are doing renewable energy because we need to address an existential threat of climate change. We know that fossil fuels contributes to climate change, and the change of an energy system is an imperative. So renewable energy, clean energy systems as they are seen to be part of the green future. And that is why the country, the world is investing in renewable energy. There is another reason. We need energy to address energy poverty. So we need to keep in mind also the fact that it's not renewable energy, but it's also energy, and it has to be affordable. Because energy poverty is absolutely unacceptable. For all of us who have the privilege of having a light, a fan, and air conditioner, we must be absolutely brutally clear that it is critical to have the same when it comes to having energy for livelihood, for employment, for education. Now, the good news is, and we need to feel very happy about this, that the government of India is absolutely committed to this transition, both in terms of the clean energy transition and the question of energy poverty. An ambitious target has been set, which is very, very good to have a big goal and a feasible goal in our view for us to be able to achieve. What we have to remember, and I really like this because, as an environmentalist, we are constantly asked the question, why is CSE not opposing coal? And we don't oppose coal. I have to make it very clear to you. We don't oppose coal because we also, and Rahul, and we've had long discussions on this, because we know the reality of India is that we're going to need to double our energy between now and 2030. So for us, the issue is not replacement of coal, but displacement of coal. We have to displace coal with clean energy sources. And what the CA document says, and I think this was the basis of the Prime Minister's speech in Glasgow, the NDCs that India has put out, is a very important document because it helps us to see the roadmap ahead. Arvind, ye thodi si lights band kar dega? Because I think this screen is a little not clear. Yeah, much better now. Thank you. So as I see, if you look at these numbers, I'm not going to get into details. All of you are energy experts, you know this, but I just want to make the point. This basically tells us that by 2030, the goal of India is that the total new renewables, and we are classifying new, there's a confusion in Indian policy, and we have to be aware of this. We use non-fossil synonymous with renewables. But we have to understand these are different. Non-fossil includes hydro and nuclear. Renewables is renewables. So we at CSC are, and we don't mind. I mean, non-fossil as a government terminology is perfectly okay. That includes renewables as well. We cannot make it synonymous. And I often find maybe the PIB and others don't understand the differences. They often use non-fossil and renewables as interchangeable. But if you look at this, the bottom line of this is that total new renewables, which today generate about 13%, have to go to 32% by 2030. Okay? Coal will not disappear, but coal will be displaced because coal, which is today 75% of our energy generation, will come down to 56%. Now if we can increase renewable even further or non-fossil even further, that coal can even come down further. So to me, the plan, if we keep on track on this, instead of getting into this question about coal or not coal, we can simply get into the question of saying, how do we scale up renewable so that coal becomes not needed? And slowly, 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 it actually gets phased out. And that's got to be the way that we have to move ahead. So the question to me is not coal, it is renewable energy. By 2030, as per CEA plan, non-fossil would supply 44% of electricity demand. Now, what is important, because remember, India has a target for 500 gigawatts. We don't have a generation target. So we are depending on the CEA report, which gives us a sense of how we will move to 2030 to put also a generation target. Now, this would require 426 gigawatt of new renewable, including close to 300 gigawatt of solar. If this is what we are working towards by 2030. And if we do this, then that's an amazing thing because solar would supply 23% of total electricity. I believe, and I think all of us in this room believe that this is ambitious, but it is definitely feasible. Technology is here, costs have come down, there are different ways of doing business in this field. We are way ahead. We can make sure that this is achieved. If you look at data from the CEA as well as MNRE, you will see that installed capacity has grown. And this is something to feel very good about. We have gone from 4 gigawatt, this is solar. Now I'm adding ground and rooftop together, has gone to about 82 gigawatt. Now, the latest data says it's close to 89 gigawatt. But 82 gigawatt, which is, we need to feel proud about it. It's a decade. And we're at a cusp of a new tomorrow. And this is clearly a way in which we can scale up if we go along this. However, there is a however, and we need to keep this in mind. Generation has not increased at the same pace. And this is something we need to understand why. And I'm hoping that with many colleagues, we'll try and understand this and unravel a little more. Why is generation not increasing at the same pace? So if you look at this data, you will see the percentage of new renewables has gone from 6 to 13%. If you look at the last table, you will see that the percentage of new renewables installed capacity has gone from 14 to 32%. Fossil fuels still give us, and this is the tragedy of India today, 76% of the total energy consumed is still coming from coal. We are not displacing coal still in terms of data, in terms of the units that are used. So the question we've asked ourselves is it because we're not optimizing on the capacity? We don't seem to get that as an answer. In fact, the data that we have, there is not full data available because we are not able to match the installed capacity of private plants to the generation. But we could get data for the central PSU plants, which are there, both in terms of installed capacity and generation. And when you put this together for last year, they're actually exceeding the capacity utilization. You will see that they're doing up to 32% in some cases. I mean, these are numbers we've taken directly from the CA. Now, whether these are right or wrong, somebody has to tell us. But I mean, just as a thought exercise, I asked my colleagues, please tell me, is capacity utilization a problem? And if you look at all this basically tells you it is not. Seasonal variations, we hear about seasonal variations, they're there, but for solar, not so much for wind. So again, not in a problem per se. So the bottom line of all this, as I'm saying, is it's technology is there. It's not a problem. Seasonal variations are not that high. It's there for wind, but if you do the hybrid projects, as is now being talked about, the bundling of projects, you get the best of solar and the best of wind. Okay? And so it's possible. Everything is, up to now, is very clear to me that we are in the realm of a big scale up that we could actually see. The other thing is that there is a very clear commitment of government for this road to 500 gigawatts. We'll all agree that the framework is evolving, but as policy is, and Manu is a policy maker, he will, policy is never static, it's dynamic. You keep learning, you keep improving, you keep building in new systems to make sure that things happen better. But the three major things that the government has done, learning from the last decade, is to try and bring down the cost of capital for large plants, try and de-risk the plants, and try and make sure that there is clear agencies who are there to do the bidding, the tendering, to be the intermediaries so that you can both buy and you can sell the power. So the systems and the governance frameworks are evolving, but they are good. They are set up to make sure that we can get to the road to 500 gigawatts. We've even got a payment security fund, and we've got the tripartite agreement so that if discoms don't pay up, there is money that can be recovered from the states. So has progress been made with all this? And I'm right now only on utility scale. The good news is, and that's something that we are still tracking, but new solar capacity has been added. There's also trade buzz that another 127 gigawatts is in the pipeline. And so if this happens, we are home safe. We are on the road to make sure that we are close to that 300 gigawatt target for solar to 90 gigawatt. And we've got all the governance and the institutions that were set up are working. However, and this is the other however that we need to understand and figure out how do we move on this, is that SECI data shows us that projects are not being commissioned beyond the effective year of PPA. And this adds up to as much as 34.5 gigawatt. And you will see that a lot of the projects that have not been commissioned come from 2021, come from 2022, and these have got effective dates of PPA. This, if you combine with the information that SECI has now put out on the projects that are stranded projects, as they have called them, projects for which there are no buyers, is also adding up to about 9.2 gigawatt. Now, there is a lot of lack of clarity in this sector and transparency in this sector. And somebody from the outside, I can only appeal to everybody to say the more transparent the sector is, the better governed it'll be. We are clutching at straws to try and understand what's happening in the sector. Why is the commissioning of projects not happening? Why is it that we are not able to connect the PPA with the power supply agreement? We don't have a complete list of all the projects that have been set up in the country. There is commissioning data from CEA. There is generation data from CEA. There's one commissioning data from SECI, but we still need data from NTPC, from state governments. All that bundle of data is really not available. It's not the same when it comes to thermal. Here, there are a lot of gaps in information. And I am particularly worried about this, and I think all of you should be as well, because there is no reason for this commissioning to not happen. There is absolutely no reason for the power utility to not sign the power supply agreement. Today, solar is cheaper than coal. A new coal plant, not greenfield, but a new coal plant using the same land would supply coal at 550 rupees, 5 rupees 50 paisa per unit. And yet we know that solar is today in the range of 240, 230, 250. So why is this not happening? My dear, you've got rid of mine. I can't see it anymore. Okay, I'll read from there then, but this is, okay. So when I spent a little time trying to understand this, because when I got this data from my colleagues, I actually wondered what was happening and why is this picture is not squaring up. So I spoke to some of our friends pretty high up in the system, and they said, one, utilities are hedging their bets. Prices are dropping. They don't want to sign a 25-year power supply agreement today and then be stuck with even a lower 10 paisa tomorrow. They also say that there is a problem of intermittency of power because they still have to pay fixed charges to coal. And so they do not want to have a situation where they are paying the fixed charges, plus they have to pay the charges for solar. But what I don't have, and I would look forward and we will keep looking for this, is there is no data on why the projects which have effective dates for PPA, they have not been commissioned. That list of projects, and if you see in your bag, we have published the list of projects and the list of developers from the SECI website so that we need to understand. And the idea here is not to point fingers. The idea here is to understand what's going wrong in the sector, because clearly this needs to be fixed. Now, one of the big game changers that is being discussed is round-the-clock projects. Clearly important, but the cost of it, and from all the data I am finding, those projects are not taking off. In the SECI list of projects that have not got commissioned, round-the-clock exists. In the projects that are stranded because of lack of buyers, there are round-the-clock projects. This data is from the economic survey, which said that the cost has come down to 4 rupees 38 paisa. And I also saw that the last reverse bidding was close to that. So again, you would argue it's competitive with coal. I'm giving you 100% renewable energy. Why are you not buying it from me? And that is a question we have to ask, because if you don't get answers, we will never be able to move ahead. I'm an old person in this field. You have to understand, in fact, in this room, I can only see Manu, who goes back with me in some of those years. But I was a member of the previous Prime Minister's Council on Climate Change, and we started the solar mission. And at that time, it was, power price was 19, 20, 24 rupees a unit. We were talking about, we did that bundling of NTPC and this because the cost was, that was the age I'm from. So you have to understand. And at that to here is an amazing journey. And one of the tools that I remember that I was very excited about was the RPO tool. And yet, why is it not being used? What can we do to strengthen it? That is clearly a question that has to come in. Again, in that generation as well, we had talked about domestic manufacturing, and we have done so. We have incentivized it. We've imposed a tax. We have made sure that we have mandated the use of domestic modules, and we have now a manufacturing sector. We took data from the export-import data, and it's very clear exports have come down. But the question is, we need to know what is the gap between the exports coming down and our own supply going up. And the problem is imports coming down and our supply going up. And the problem also is that we seem to be exporting a lot more. So are we going to become the exporter of the world? Do we have the capacity to meet the world's need plus our needs? Because that is going to be an issue. And the big issue with Trump coming and the big war between the big players in the world is, where are we going to get caught with the supply chain challenges? Because even now with the modules and the cells, the basic raw material comes from China. So what then would be the future of this is something to be discussed as well. But this is about utility. I really want to tell you what excites. And we have Harish here, who is absolutely the guru of this in this country.
The world, absolutely the world. No, absolutely the world. But I have to say, Harish, when we were younger, all of us, renewable for us was about this new energy system. It was about a changing future where we had these old players who were bringing in fossil fuel energy through the grid, supplying it, and that had problems. And we said, this is going to change, and we're going to do something completely different and change the energy system. And it's an energy system which is modular. It's an energy system which can put power in the hands of people. And yet, we are not making it work at the scale that it needs to. And I have to say, Harish, that where you have succeeded in many cases in this, I find that we did the parallel with water harvesting and with non-sewered sanitation, saying, why do we need an underground sewage system? Just take the sewage from a septic tank and treat it. If you can get a mobile phone and you today don't need a landline, you can harvest your rain and you can treat your own sewage on site. You're basically, and that's what we're doing in this campus. And I argued this, in fact, in this very room with Secretary Urban Development, and he became so excited and committed to it. He said, yes, we are going to do non-sewered sanitation. Because why do we have to go through the landline route to get toilets and sanitation? We can do the satellite route, like we have in mobile phones, and make sure everybody has access to clean water and clean energy. So I think that's the future that excites many of us. And the question is, how do we make it work? There are challenges, but there are also opportunities. And that's really, to me, the big issue. I mean, I call it the Uber solution. How did Uber succeed? They basically, or Airbnb succeed. They said, we won't invest in a car or the asset of it. We will use somebody else's asset and we will optimize on it. And that's the Airbnb and Uber model. Here you're using the land of someone else, the labor of somebody else to be able to optimize on what needs to be done, energy. So it's a very exciting field.
It's an empowering field. It's literally power in the hands of people. Yet, and I think we need to ask, why is it not happening? We have the rooftop solar program. You would have seen we have full rooftop here. Ours is solarized. We have a RESCO model. Now we have the PM Surya Ghar project that has come. Huge subsidy is going to be given and very nicely targeted to the poorest, 300 units of electricity a month. We need, and I'm hoping that we will hear today and discuss today, how do we resolve whatever are the remaining challenges in this? How do we make sure this decentralized energy future happens, not in the scale of large plants, but in the scale of making a difference at the ground? And the Million Flowers Bloom is the opportunity here. Again, with PM Kusum, the solar pump project has been the most powerful, but clearly, as our data and our visits show, there are issues with it. So at the end, I just want to say, we have various options. The world is going to be very disrupted. I'm not even talking about Donald Trump. Okay, but it's going to be very disrupted between now and 2030. There is new technologies coming in, new opportunities coming in. It's going to be, in a sense, a world where we can do what we can make best use of that, or we can get very depressed because we are not succeeding where we must succeed. So I am the other. I feel very optimistic to think we'll be able to do things, but if we think very carefully and deliberately, what is our objective? Why are we doing something? And how do we get there? Now we know we can go off-grid completely. Battery technologies may be there very quickly to make us go off-grid. But on the other hand, I can tell you very clearly, I am a great believer in the discoms, the distribution companies. I mean, we supply to them, we buy from them at night. I just wish that they didn't have so many power breakdowns so that my solar system doesn't have to run on a generator, okay? And that we don't have to run a generator at night. But how do we improve the health of the discom? So rather than you can do the round-the-clock projects, you can do all your storage, but instead of planning for large-scale storage, your discoms become your storage systems. But we need to work on these to make that happen. But the bottom line is that the RE transition is not about technology or finance. It is about our purpose and our objectives. And most importantly, it is about the politics of inclusion. We know that only if growth is affordable, and in this case, energy is affordable, can it be sustainable. So we need to bring the politics back into RE. We need to make sure that the objectives of why we are doing renewable energy come back to the core of the sector. It is not an infrastructure sector. It is a sector to enable a green future when it comes to climate change and put energy in the hands of the poorest in this country. Thank you very much. Manu, if I may now invite you. As you can see, we don't stand on much ceremony. There are no flowers and others being given to you, and we're on the job.
It's a pleasure and a privilege to be with CSE, as Sunita ji had mentioned. I had got an opportunity to work with her when I was looking after natural gas, and we used to work together on CNG for cities. For the last few years, I've been working in renewable energy. I would just ask you whether, I mean, there is a presentation I have, but rather than that, I think it would make sense you raise some issues. If I could just answer that. Okay. Now, before I, move ahead with the presentation, because most of you might not know me or so I mean, I must tell you where I come from. Because I was referred to as a policy maker, and that is an allegation that I can appreciate because of my service. But I must like to say that I have actually set up projects from scratch till completion. So what I'm saying is coming from experience of having set up projects apart from deciding policy. I'm an electrical engineer by education. I have been in the energy sector almost throughout. I've handled natural gas, electricity, renewable energy. So I have a view of the entire sector. And also, I would not classify myself as someone who is uncomfortable in a meeting of NTPC discussing thermal power. So I am not, um, I mean, I would not be seen in, say, a Greenpeace protest, so I'm not in that group either. So what I'm saying is largely a convergence of what renewable energy and energy can do. So I would just okay. So I would also like to add, perhaps, which is part of the presentation that I was going to make, was that we can do things to make a difference, and how through project structuring we can make a change. So I would just mention 2-3 lines so that just to give you an idea of, so that you take me seriously, let's say. So, so the first project in India which brought down the price of solar below coal was set up by me. At that time, Government of India companies used to give subsidy to get a tariff of 4.5 rupees. I set up a small company, no permanent office, just 2-3 staff, and we got a first-year tariff of below 3 rupees without any subsidy. That project also supplies power to Delhi Metro. Subsequently, Government of India issued standard bidding guidelines, largely based on our project, and that is how all projects over 5 megawatt are legally bound to be run now in India. Then this is a big project, 750 megawatt project, spread over 1,500 hectare. Then at the other end of the spectrum, I've done small rooftop projects, where again we got the lowermost rates in the country. But the point is that the principles in both of them are very similar. Okay. Having said that, I would like to address the issues that Sunita ji raised. So the first issue that she said, that why we are keen on why we should be in a room like this is for the Mother Earth, or is for the climate. Now, that is also a very good reason to be in this room, but that is not the only reason to be in this room. Climate change is a big room, and there are many parts of that room. Now, at least renewable energy is one part, or at least some parts of renewable energy, which are viable as of today. There are so many things in climate change, for example, carbon sequestration, which are still not viable. But renewable energy is. So if we are talking about renewable energy today, it is for both the reasons of economic viability as also climate change. And the reason that we pitch has to do with the audience. So saying that you are doing it for climate change puts off a serious investor, because they are interested in commercial gains. When we talked to Delhi Metro and said that they should take power from a project that we are setting up, we didn't tell them that you should take power because there is this ice in Antarctica melting, and Delhi Metro should have a great role to prevent the ice in Antarctica from melting. And Delhi Metro was not bound by any RPOs as well, because Delhi Metro was a customer like CSC is here. They just were drawing power from Delhi Discoms. So there was no need of any, there is no obligation, regulatory direction for them as well. And they were rightly not bothered about the ice in Antarctica from melting. So the only reason for them to go ahead with renewable was that it saved them money. And which I think is the noblest reason for anything to happen. If something has to happen on scale, it can only happen if it's economically viable. We have to move ahead, move beyond the time when renewable energy is like this tie that one is wearing that serves a decorative purpose, but doesn't cover my body from cold or nakedness, which is supposed to be inappropriate. So tie doesn't do either of these things. So, I mean, solar energy has, we are beyond the era that solar energy was a tie. Solar energy is now the cloth that we are wearing. So solar energy can only move ahead with the scale if it's economically viable. And thankfully, we are in time that it is happening. There was a time, yes, Sunita ji rightly mentioned, that solar energy was 20 rupees. And then it was a tie. It was a tie at that time. Now it is a cloth. So this should also bring me to the second issue of what Sunita ji said, is that why does renewable RPO not work? The answer is hidden in the name. It doesn't work because it's an obligation. See, I mean, with a lot of respect to religions, most religions are built on this edifice that, you know, what is noble is something that is painful. So that is why all temples or churches, etc., on top of a hill. I mean, why couldn't it be on the road? You know, I mean, God is everywhere. So the premise is that what is noble has to be gone through a painful process. That is not so anymore. So we should stop talking of RPO. And we should say that you should take renewable energy because it makes economic sense to do so. Now, rather than go through the presentation or anything, if you can just help me with this, I'll just have a small slide which I realized when she spoke. So I picked it up from my computer and I'll share it with you. So we've done a small analysis of the analysis of the thermal plants in the state in the state of Madhya Pradesh. So the other one. What is their variable cost? Yeah. And how much time are they scheduled? So let's look closely at this data. I just pulled it out while she's speaking. Now, this is the variable cost. This is not the fixed cost. Fixed cost is sunk cost. You're giving it, I mean, it's like house rent. You pay it whether you live in the house or not. But variable cost is the cost that you pay when you actually run the thermal plant. Now, I picked up those plants whose variable cost is more than 3 rupees. As you see, it goes up till 5 rupees. So this is the variable cost of the plants. And look at the annual scheduling. They have been scheduled for various periods from 90%, above 90% to as much as 60%. Now, if a plant is scheduled for 90% of the time throughout the year, it is obvious that it is being run in the daytime. I mean, we're not living in the Arctic zone. So if a plant is running for 90% of time throughout the year, it means it is running almost at its full capacity on large number of days. Now, it makes sense that such plants run at technical minimum. As I said, that I would be as comfortable in an LTPC room or a thermal plant room as well. So I would not say that they should stop, because thermal plant can't stop like this. So it has to run on something called a technical minimum. So it makes sense that thermal plants should run at technical minimum during daytime. And this is something that makes economic sense to DISCOMs. And then if some DISCOM or some state is not doing it, it is a very clear indication of inefficiency of the DISCOM and of wrong decision making, which is something that hits the DISCOM's finances and which makes sense to every person. Which makes sense to every person who reads the newspaper, to a politician. RPO is something which, I mean, these days there's a lot of atmosphere against Lutyens, Delhi, and so on. I'm as much a part of it. I was born in Safdurjung Hospital. I was studied, yeah. So I was born in Safdurjung Hospital. I studied in Delhi IIT. South Delhi is only part of Delhi I know well. But RPO is somehow a concept that seems to originate from a very I mean, something that's not rooted in reality. Whereas what I'm saying is something that's rooted in reality. If we just have a very transparent number, I mean, if you just have a principle that no state should have a thermal plant running during daytime, a thermal plant with a variable charge of, let's say, more than 3 rupees. Today, there is power available at 2.5 rupees. Yes, of course, 2 days back, we did a bidding in Madhya Pradesh. We got a tariff of 2 rupees 15 paisa, which is the lowermost since ALMM has been imposed by the government from April. So it's been the lowest till now was SECI's 2.48. We got 2.15 2 days back. But let's not even talk of 2.15. Let's talk of something like 3 or 2.75, whatever be that number. So one very clear, pointer of what you should aim at should be a thermal plant with a variable charge of whatever, 3, 2.75, 2.5, that it should only run at technical minimum. You should quantify how much are you running beyond technical minimum. And that is a mark of DISCOM's inefficiency, something that is harming DISCOMs themselves. So we should move away from something like, see, RPO makes sense if you are doing something which doesn't make sense to do, but you're still doing it for some other reason, which is also very valid. I mean, there could be some externalities. For example, even today, the whatever argument I'm giving is only true about solar and to a certain extent about wind. It is not true about biomass. It is not true about waste to energy, though they are very important. I mean, both for reasons we understand, there is so much social externality. So RPO should be imposed for waste to energy, for biomass, these things. If someone wants to go for offshore wind, things like that, but not for what makes economic sense to do. We should not have RPO for that anymore, but we should have physical, quantifiable, financially relevant parameters rather than vague parameters like RPO. Then I have a lot of quarrel with targets. Now, I'm reminded of 2 stories, none of which happened, but that is the idea of stories. Okay, both of them happened to a certain extent. So it's like a student who, at the beginning of the year, spends a lot of time quarreling or wondering and discussing with a lot of people whether they should study for 10 hours in a day or 12. Or sort of for someone who's at 200 kgs weight and decides that what is the target weight for that person? Is it 80 or 90? So I think for the first person, they should just start studying. And for the second, they should just start eating less and walking more. So I think we should be doing that, because what would happen in 2035 would primarily depend on the shape, on the prices then. And it is not for any one of us to know right now. But we can do what we can do today. And it is stupid not to be doing that today. And what you see in front of you is precisely that. So rather than bothering about what we are doing 2013, 2035, you should primarily be doing what we are doing right now, that we should be replacing our thermal plants, we should make our thermal plants run at technical minimum during daytime. The second thing that we need to do is that we need to, what has happened is that just as, I mean, we think that the earth is round and the moon is round because we think that round is a ideal to which everything should conform to. But nature is not like that. Like pi is not 3 or 4. It's not even 3.14. So it's a complicated number because, I mean, that is how nature is. So we should stop making solar mimic thermal. Rather, we should make our demand try to adhere to the pattern of solar generation. So that is the first thing that needs to be done. So the example of that would be, I mean, the easiest example would be, we should try to supply to our customers during solar time. Can you just help me, please? So, दूसरा वाला slide दिखा दो. Okay, yeah, thanks. Okay, so this is how, for example, we supply power in Madhya Pradesh. That we supply to our farmer. I mean, see, to all people except farmers, you supply power for 24 hours. So there is very limited lever that you have. But for agriculture customers, you don't supply them for 24 hours. So for example, in Madhya Pradesh, this is how we supply power to them. We supply we aim to give power for 10 hours, 6 hours during day, 4 hours during night. Uh, Now, this is not meant to be, this is not tailored to solar power. Now, what we should do is that we should be increasingly be supplying to our agricultural customers only during solar power. So we should try to increase the demand. I mean, so traditionally what has happened is, if you look at most discoms and most states, how they review their performance, they have a shape of peak power and they have a shape of energy demand. And any variation in that is seen as a challenge that we have to address. It is not a challenge that we have to address because of the particular pattern of solar generation. Rather, we should tailor our demand in accordance with solar generation. What we are doing right now is we are trying to make solar generation flat. We are trying to make it like thermal. So what is talk of FDRE is nothing but trying to make solar generation like thermal. Rather than that, we should make our demand adhere to what solar is, because rather than trying to force the nature to be like us, perhaps it's simpler if we try to be like what nature is. So the first thing that we need to do is that we need to supply to our farmers in accordance with the solar supply. Second thing that we do as far as other customers are concerned, we don't have any other lever. We are committed to supply power to them for 24 hours, understandably. So there we can have pricing is the only signal that we have. So, for example, in Madhya Pradesh, from this financial year, we have giving a 20% discount on consumption of power from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. And there's also a penalty or a premium or a penalty on a or higher tariff for the peak hours. So it is 6 to 9 in the morning and 5 to 10 in the evening. So the differential really between 4:55 p.m. and 5:05 p.m. is a hefty to 40%. It's minus 20% here and plus 20% there. And similarly, so that is one thing that you can do to increase your demand during solar hours. So that is the other thing that we need to do. So regarding target, what I would say is that there is a lot that needs to be done today. So we should be focusing a lot on that and try to address the problems that we have today. And if we do that, see what has to happen in future. It is very presumptive of us to think that we would decide everything. So a lot of things are decided by technology, by so, I mean, okay. Okay. So a lot of things are decided by, by technology, by the initiative of the private sector, by what engineering colleges do, what travels, etc., etc. Government policy has a very important role in that. But to say that the government policy would handle it entirely is also not correct. So we should try to solve all the problems today, facilitate talking of the student. So the student should start studying. If there are any problems that the student is facing today, the student should start addressing those problems, trying to solve those problems, and not really bother about whether finally I should get 95% marks or 94% marks. So, okay. The other point that you said, that why are there no procurers? So perhaps we should first have procurers and then do bidding. That is what I did. I set up a new company and I didn't have the confidence that Seki had, and I did not know who the winner of my bid would be. And I mean, if you know them, then you can trust them that they can go to people and convince them to buy. I wasn't sure who those bidders would be. Well, so we did a very transparent bid, but for that, we didn't want people to have excessive confidence in us or our future bidders, and we didn't even know who they would be. So we firstly arranged the procurers, and then we went ahead and did the bidding. So for example, the bidding, which I said got 2 rupees 15 paisa, we didn't tell our bidders that you sell power to us and then trust me, you would find someone. Or you go and try to convince people to do that. We arranged the state and Indian Railways. They were tied procurers. It was known that they would be doing the procurement. And that is perhaps one of the reasons that we have been able to get low bids. Another issue that was raised was about decentralized power. I would perhaps talk about that. Okay, let me just talk about run through a few slides of the presentation. And should be that or should be a slideshow? Okay. Okay. So as I said, REWA was the first project. Before that, it was not economically viable, good for the environment, good for energy security. REWA was the first project which brought down the rate of power bureau. So this is the rate of, at that time, what were the prevailing rates? SECI's target tariff used to be 443. And the bidding was on viability gap funding. And the organization taking the least viability gap funding from the government of India was awarded the project. And the viability gap funding was substantial, almost, I would say, 10 to 15% of the capital cost. And NTPC had a simpler system. They would just a bidding and then take some money from government of India and merge it to give it a rate of 450 was the target rate for solar power at that time in India. Then, as is the practice today, in India, solar power is supposed to be move ahead with something called SPPDs, Solar Project Power, Solar Power Park Developers. So it is a joint venture of SECI and NTPC, either of the two, and a state organization. And the structure is supposed to be that SECI and NTPC is supposed to do everything. Conceptualization, develop the market, run the bid, etc. And the role of the state is only to arrange the land and develop the infrastructure. So this is how RUMS had come up. But then when I saw the entire process, I realized that there is a lot that needs to be improved. And then we went ahead and did the entire activity. And so we ran the entire thing ourselves. And these are the rates we got. While Government of India companies were paying subsidy to get 4.5 rupees, we got a first-year tariff of below 3 rupees. This was in 2017. And all big companies, including a large number of companies from outside the country, participated. There was SoftBank from Japan. There was NG from France, Enel from Italy, Semcop from Singapore, a Mauritius company, which actually run one of the 3 projects, and a Canadian company, and large number of Indian companies. So a lot of enthusiasm in the sector for the project. And this is when it was a new company. There was no permanent office. We just 2 or 3. We had no permanent staff at that time. We just have 3, 4 even now. And it was first project, but still we had such huge response because of the strength of the documents and because they could see that the processes that we were running were sound. This changed the way projects are done in the country. So SECI and NTPC withdrew all their tenders, and you see Mr. Venkaiah Naidu here because he was the Urban Development Minister at that time, and Delhi Metro was under that. So he had come for the PPA signing, and Mr. Piyush Goyal was the Power and MNRE Minister at that time. So then Government of India issued standard bidding guidelines. So our bidding was in February. They issued in September 17, largely based on what we had done. And now all above 5 megawatt projects are supposed to run on this. So the Honorable Prime Minister inaugurated the project. The World Bank talks a lot about the project. It's a World Bank funded project. There's case study on the project in Singapore Management University, in the Harvard. Then I would talk of rooftop solar projects. What I had said earlier was that the principles of a big project like REWA, 1,500 hectare, and rooftop projects are essentially the same. The principles have to be that you have to mitigate the risk of the investor. You have to lessen the risk of the investor, and then the investor would offer you low prices. And if we have to increase the adoption of renewable energy, the only way is low prices. Because as I said, the ice in Antarctica melting is not a strong enough reason to people to take actual decisions. I mean, if that is the only reason, renewable energy can never move beyond CSR. If it has to be a part of actual decision making, it has to make economic sense. Prices have to come down. For prices have to come down, if we are following the PPP mode or the developer mode, then we have to look at the risks and uncertainties of the developers, and only then the price will come down. Okay. Okay, so then I would not, okay, just I would talk at rooftop solar is again same principles. I would just talk of one more issue that you talked about, that is FDRE. That fixed dispatch, that why is not it a hit? You know, why are people not accepting it? I think it's very good that they are not accepting it. Okay, now and I would tell you an example, which might not be an appropriate example at 11 in the morning, but that is the best way I've learned of trying to explain it. So what does a fixed, okay, just imagine a bartender. A bartender has 500 bottles of liquor behind them. And the core job of the bartender is to mix liquors and to prepare cocktails and to serve it at a higher price than the price of the individual portions of liquor that they have used. That is the core job of the bartender. And that is exactly what our states do, exactly what our state load dispatch centers do. They mix the various sources of power to make a cocktail to match the varying profile of the demand. This is exactly the job of our state load dispatch center. Now, if there is a new cocktail to be served, what does the bartender do? Does the bartender buy a cocktail, or does the bartender buy the new liquors and make a new cocktail? It makes sense because that is the core job of the bartender, to mix the liquors to serve the cocktail, is to buy plain vanilla liquors and to make the new cocktail, because that is their core job. The same is not true for an industry or railways, which do not have a load dispatch center. It makes sense for them to buy FDRE because they are just sourcing power and using it. But states, for the states, the ideal thing to do is to source more vanilla sources of power, source more solar, more wind, more storage, and to mix them all together. This increasing complexity of FDREs is causing inefficiencies. I mean, I think that I can go into more technology to explain this, but briefly speaking, that is the point. The job, the way out is source. It's very often said these days that the days of vanilla solar are over. That's absolutely not the case. This thesis of vanilla solar, the days of vanilla solar being over, and FDRE being the toast of the season, is something being peddled by developers, because developers find that plain vanilla solar has become too competitive. There's far too much competition. There is far more margins to be made in complicated things like FDRE. And then FDRE pricing, actually what you mentioned, is also not a very honest pricing, because what it does is that the penalties if you don't supply during peak power have been kept intentionally very low, which actually, it's like a not wink situation that let's get a low tariff, but if there is an actual problem, anyway, it's a small part of the total metrics. So how does it matter if you don't do what you do? So what this is the right way to be doing. I have myself changed a project in Madhya Pradesh, which was a FDRE tender, into something like a solar plus a storage tender, and Rahul has also had a role to play in that, with a lot of opposition, but I think it makes more and more sense to be doing so. So I would just say the FDRE is not the right thing to be doing. And I think I'll just keep my remarks to that. And thank you so much. And
I mean, I wish we had a little more time, because I can see from these are the issues we discussing. Question of, I mean, I'm not going to get to the RPO, because the RPO, I think, is in any case at a different generation.
at that time, it was needed. It was needed.
at that time when the power cost of solar was, as you said, 17, 18, 19 rupees. Today, there is no reason why solar needs to not compete with coal. Okay, which means we need a new generation of thinking. And I think
So those
from-
solutions are not relevant anymore because the situation has entirely changed.
Absolutely. So I think we'll keep that in mind, and we will come back to Manu with questions as we get the panel done, because this is an important issue. And I'm glad you've raised the issue of, I call it round the clock. The other term I know is FDRE. But I also was wondering, is this really going to be that magic solution? So thank you for clarifying. Thank you. Wonderful. Mr. Das, if I may now ask you, very important stakeholder in the energy sector. You're also one of the old generation, first to be established, if I remember right, IREDA. I mean, you think about it in some senses, because the country was way ahead of its time. Okay, to set up IREDA in 1987 tells you that people had foresight in thinking about it. And I think it's such an important institution to help us, to guide us on this as we move forward. Please.
Very good morning to all. I think all are sleeping mode. Very good morning to all. Yeah, that is the way the IRE can develop. You have to reciprocate each other. First of all, let me express my gratitude to Sunita ji and CSC for inviting me to this program. This is my second program where I'm participating in an institute. So first, other than my institute, that is Cost and Management Institute. So, and since so many experts or gurus, as Sunita ji has said in the dais, I'm slightly nervous. Like the renewable developer, when they start putting into the newcomers first, they're a little bit nervous. So my talk will be largely on lenders' perspective or finance, being the largest green finance company in the country. So I want to support from you. I'll request you, how many of you know IREDA? Honestly, please raise your hands. Hardly 10-20%. And how many of you knew IREDA before a year, before IPO? Be honest. Again, well, it is established in 1987, and as of now, it is the largest pure play green finance company. When I say pure play, means it's 100% renewable finance company. Renewable energy, energy access, energy efficiency, and anything connected directly or indirectly to the value chain of RE, that also we have started extending that. About me, I'll not ask because most of you might not be knowing except Sunita ji. Might be heard my name because I'm heading IREDA since 4.5 years. And we had a historic IPO. I'll talk that later. My presentation, probably the first couple of slides will not be required because Sunita ji has already set the context, and whatever slightly force was required, that has been reinforced by Manuji. Can someone tell me how to move this? It is not a PPT. Okay. So we are on a national dialogue on equitable green transition. So first of all, why you are talking of green transition? Because already Sunita ji has said, since I have the slide, just I will take a couple of seconds in this. These are the sources of carbon. When you talk about 2070 net zero, the blue zone is coming from industry, transport, and other energy applications. If you have to reach to 2070, we have to get into reduction of 36 gigatons of CO2. That we can do by adding, replacing renewable energy, 10, electrification supported by renewable energy, 11. So like that, green hydrogen and all other sources. Yeah, thank you. Why? Because it has environmental sustainability, then energy access and affordability, then economic opportunity. Anything you talk today, we are living largely by commercial thoughts. While starting the children's education, when you look at top-notch technical institute, I'm not taking the names, of top-notch management institutes, first you see what is the CTC of last batch. So that is the economic. If there is no economic sense, nobody is going to set up a project. And no lender will come forward to lend. And not only economic prospect, but also risk mitigation to be in place. Then only. Then comes social equity. She's working in this resource conservation, water, and since I think she's born in this world because of this. You'll hardly find anybody, at least I don't know anybody. I know very few persons, so one of them is she. So who is completely devoted her life for others. When I'm talking others means not only human beings, all living creatures. But we do not require so many Sunita ji. We require many more who can execute what we have learned so far, what we know so far. I think that is the gap there today. So these are the challenges. So this is, as I said, my second program in the institute. I generally do not give any PPT presentation. I speak whatever I know from here. And this is my second one, so second presentation. So I'm not that proficient in moving. It is not that I do not know, I know, but I'm not practiced. See, 1850 to 2021, if you see the emission and what we are expecting, if we have hardly 496 credit balance. If we will not take corrective action, we will reach to that level of 1.5 degree, which will become difficult to reverse or can become irreversible. And if you look at 40% of this red zone contribution is coming from 4 developed countries, economies. They are developed at the cost of whom? All. The land belongs to some, atmosphere belongs to all. So when they have contributed so much to the atmosphere, they have developed at the cost of all. Now, as a developing nation, if you see per capita contribution or emission, it's quite low. Still, we are working much more sincerely and seriously in our pursuit for reaching to that level. What developed nations should do? 3 areas particularly. Access to financing, which when you want to set up renewable project, you require soft financing. I'll talk about that a little more. Access to technology. Since this is technology centric, like already the earlier speaker spoken, the price used to be 20 rupees, 24 rupees, 10, 15 years back. Now it has come down to exactly 1/10. Technological disruption and larger participation of stakeholder, that is scaling up the things. Similar thing is going to happen in those areas which is now new and emerging. See, what was the drawbacks or fallbacks or which we could have got better and didn't happen in COP29? We could not have a definitive agreement. And when we require roughly 1,300 billion, only 300 million is nothing. I attended a program in London, I think, last year. The head of Congo very categorically said, I have to first see survival of my population. I cannot just agree with you as because you want to decarbonize. Same logic you have already said in India also. When you talk about not removing coal, replacing coal. See, the way we are growing, if you take 6.5 of GDP, every percentage of GDP growth requires 1.25 times of energy growth. And energy you have to get from where? Overnight, you cannot have renewable energy. And it is intermittent nature. You need to have continuous supply. We do not have enough storage. Even the technology for storage is not cost competitive as on date, but which was not cost competitive 10, 20 years back, like solar, it has come down to 1/10. Similarly, the storage or other new area, those are also going to come down. Now, this is the main thing, the road of 500 gigawatt. This 500 gigawatt is, I'll clarify, it is not renewable. It is renewable and nuclear together. When I'm saying renewable, since Government of India has now defined large hydro as renewable, post November 2019. Prior to that, small hydro was only defined as renewable. Now on all the data we are adding up. But globally, this renewable definition was there, large hydro earlier also. India aligned with that in 2019. Nuclear is coming in for non-fossil, but not in renewable. That is, in this 500 gigawatt, 15 is planned for nuclear, 485 is planned for remaining one, which includes large hydro also. The way the area, now we are talking of 485. 2030, we are talking of REM. Nuclear, I am not bringing here. Till 2022, if you see, the rate of capacity addition was not that encouraging. As he has already said, we need to have a sudden jump. You need to have hockey stick kind of growth, sustainable growth from 2024 to 2030. I think this graph is showing like hockey stick. So our plans are in a hockey stick line, but we'll see how going to be. Now, we have been talking of solar and wind so far. Offshore wind has not yet been explored in India, but already 2 blocks have been identified, one near Tamil Nadu, other is Gujarat side. The bidding has already happened. Perhaps for Gujarat it is over, Tamil Nadu I don't remember. And then again, the economy there, the capacity size is almost 3.5x. Investment requirement is also almost 3.5x. What? Onshore versus offshore wind. Onshore wind, I don't think there is any gap funding required now, like or solar. I'll forget only one point I'll add. When we are talking of solar 2.4 or 2.5 or 3, one cost in solar still given, that is interstate transmission charges. That need to be added when we compare with coal or thermal. Because still that kind of concession is there. So when you do then apple to apple comparison, that you can load notionally, then do the comparison. So that is still there. If you see globally, we're in 4th position today as far as RE installed capacity is concerned. But we are the first, our growth is fastest. Like in solar, we have grown more than 35 times in last 10 years. No industry, no sector has grown in that kind of rate And one more point I'm giving you. Unlike thermal in India, where 80% project developed by government sector, it is just reverse in renewable. 80% project developed by private sector. And private sector invests when there is economics. When you will analyze IREDA, then you will know what is there, because we do 100% renewable. Now, this installed capacity, we have reached to 203. That is again RE only. And another, if you take, I think 8 or something, 8 gigawatt is there in nuclear. If you add up, it is 211. But we were talking since 485, so 203. That is of October 2024 data. Now, see, in this period, 22-23, we had peak COVID of 2021 and 22-23. Certainly during that period, when we are struggling for saving the people, life of people, and it was affecting all, not rich or poor. So during that period, if you see, the number of capacity addition was not that much. Then again, addressing the challenges and uncertainties, the participants in the ecosystem, be it regulator, be it policymaker, be it developer, be it banker, all have to work together. Perhaps we have reached to a situation where a fair amount of uncertainty has been addressed. Like vanillary, when I say vanillary, I mean solar, wind, and hydro. Solar, wind, and hydro, wind, and onshore wind, and normal hydro. We have come to a stage now. We can grow in this desired CAGR of 16%. See, in last 10 years, if solar can grow 35 times, one of the key components is bringing into SECI existence. Now, SECI is a government organization, we know. They have their all kind of constraints. When I say government versus private, within government organization, we carry 3 Cs behind us. That is CAG, CVC, and CBI, which is not there in case of a private sector. Anyway, I started my career in private sector, then I'm working in government sector, so I know I've seen both the kind of things. So both the sector has its role to play to make Viksit Bharat by 2047. Now in this 500 gigawatt capacity, 485 is renewable and 15 I have already said. In addition to this, around 42 gigawatt of storage that also has been planned. What is the opportunity for renewable? If you see in the total till 2030 in the economy, we have made a rough estimate. This any estimate based on certain assumption. Other agency may vary from it, but there will be not much variation into this. We require around 250 to 260 lakhs, in the range of 220 to 260 lakhs crores of investment. If you see the energy itself, only we require 60-65 lakh crores. And the renewable energy itself, 32 lakhs crores. And unlike thermal, in renewable, as it is technology centric, and the policies also very frequently change because of the uncertainties, and it is aligned as per the requirement to the extent feasible, possible by the policymaker. So bringing in 32 lakh crores of investment in this space is also a big challenge. Now, if you ask me personally, I do not have any doubt, since I'm working in this sector 4.5 years. I'm the youngest, least experienced person working in, who are sitting in this side. not only by look, but also by experience also. Otherwise, I am youngest among all, except Sunita ji. Age pointer. Now, what government policy and initiatives has been taken so far? When I talk the ecosystem, government is a policy maker. The key thing starts from there. And again, government is the agency who will maintain that cohesiveness, coordinate among all, listen to all. And we all know that electricity is a concurrent subject. It is not only central government, state government has its authority to decide on that also. See, if you analyze demand side and supply side, what enabling provisions government has created in recent years, I put in the reverse order actually. PM Suryagar Multi Bijli Yojana, interstate transmission charges waiver, which I said that need to be added when we compare with the coal one. Open access charges waivers, green open access rules, renewable purchase obligations. Already Manuji has spoken on RPO, so I'll not talk much. Supply side, if you see, must run status Prabhari, CPSU schemes, PM Kusum, lunch, GDAM and GTAM, PPA-based tenders, renewable energy zones like solar parks. By the way, Manuji, when was talking about Ramsel, we are the lender to them, he did not took our name. And I'll tell another secret. We are incurring loss there. When we lended, it was profitable to us. But since it is a government project and it is having much of impact in the renewable industry, and they are the state who took leapfrog approach there to go for the solar park and all. We have funded them. Actually, it is a World Bank line of credit. It was lended through us. Why it is now lost to us? Because the dollar has gone up. And we are wearing the entire hedging with in our book. See, I'll tell here one minute. There is a misnomer in our country. All these MDBs, international agencies, they lend us at a concessional rate. We have proved them it is wrong. When I joined IREDA, our borrowing composition was 55% overseas, like these agencies. And it has come down to only 16% now. And we have prepaid many loans, but their loan we are not prepaying. We are also a Government of India organization, and they are also government, be it MP or whatever is their government. And since it is a solar park, it has a lot of opportunity for the solar developer to come and set in. Only somewhere we are having some loss, and that loss also with our finance management, we can improvise some point of time. And in a basket, 1 or 2 account, if we make some nominal loss, that is acceptable. We have to see in a holistic manner. Here, this PM Suryagar and Kusum, it can be put in both ways, demand as well as supply side. Because here, PM Kusum, there it is generating. So therefore, we have put in supply side and mostly to the agriculture sector. Now, what are the improvement required? We have classified into 3 categories. That is land availability, transmission, and offtake agreement. Like post bidding also by SECI and other agencies, the PPA is not getting signed. The bidder has bidded at a lower price. We are happy that we got at this rate. But until unless the PPA is signed and it is executed, this price is theoretical. Similarly, land, again, land is a state subject. Whatever policy and measures mechanism Government of India does, or as a lender, we look into lending concession. Until unless the land issues will be addressed, it cannot be. Our one experience, particularly state, I think I can name the state also, doesn't matter, because it's on record. Karnataka. Land conversion takes huge time. Some of our borrowers, they took the loan and we allowed them time. Normally, when you allow time, 2 months, 6 months, for years, they could not do. And the borrower was paying additional charges. Still, it is economical to him. But again, though I run my organization, it is not a private organization, it is a government organization. It has to be run in democracy. My team was not confident that we are not creating security. This will become a precedent. Others will come forward and do the same manner. Then time will come, we will not have secured asset in our book. If I'll not, see, project is running, project is paying us, no issue, but project is not secured because the land is not converted. For any eventuality, as a lender, we don't have any recourse. Finally, account shifted to another bank. They did not insist for this kind of security. We lost business. The developer got benefited. But this is, again, we are finding the lacuna in the banking system. And I would have more happy had it gone to a private bank. It went to a government bank. Then I was telling my team, don't become that kind of bureaucratic. I'm not criticizing bureaucracy. Bureaucracy is required. Bureaucracy for governance, for system, for policy. But then we have to have our business sense also. So that become example. Now in our consecutive successive loans, we are giving them time. We are not insisting them much also. See, as long as our asset quality is maintained and the project is good and generating enough revenue and the cash flow is certain, till such time security is meaningless. Otherwise, security is just a piece of paper. You can tell me the time constraint, I will complete also. See, 1423 and 2440, I have shown here the investment, how it will be moving, and which sector require how much. Solar, as usual, because solar is easy. That's why solar. So those are difficult. We have not mentioned here green hydrogen. No lender is lending. We have started lending, in fact. Storage, we have started lending also. Because somewhere we have to start, because my company comes under Ministry of New and Renewable Energy. So new and emerging sector, we have to lend. And we are the extended arm, single agency. Power Ministry, they have another 2 companies. But they are basically, first there was for fossil fuel. Even if you look at REC PFC today, REC book is having 6% renewable, PFC is having 12% renewable, and both the companies having 90% government loans. My book is having 76% private loans. Who are the lenders? Both equity and debt. In equity space, you have Brookfield, KKR, TPG, ADIA, GIC, all those fund-based organizations globally, because 100% FDI is allowed in RE. In debt, you can find REC, PFC, IREDA, SBIA. Even when you go for bond subscription, this SBI, LIC, all others. When we talk that green financing or green energy and all, even today in India, we have not defined what is green. Many other countries, they have defined. The definition may not be unique to all. Country like Bangladesh, Mongolia, they have defined also. That is different in what kind of economy they are, but at least there is a definition. See, why I'm asking, what will enable? Like we are 100% green finance company. Anybody investing in our company are not getting that benefit what they are supposed to get in investing in green. After 37 years of existence, being the largest green finance company in the country, we do not get single benefit from government. So how and what way we can enable cheaper finance? When you talk about 32 lakh crores, and when you talk about new and emerging sources, if you cannot bring in cheaper finance, your project is not going to become viable. And we cannot bring cheaper finance. We have to load risk premium as long as the risk matrix is not well addressed. That is the RBI's norm. If project is risk, you have to add risk premium. If I have to load risk premium, my interest cost is going up. If interest cost is going up, then project is not going to become bankable. If it is not bankable, will not lend, then no new project will come. This is IREDA. We have so far sanctioned 2.08 lakh crores. We have finance of 1,38,000 crores. And our current loan book is 64,000 crores. Everybody is here knowing mathematics well. 4.5 years back, I joined. Our book size was 22,000 crores. We had 179 manpower, including me. Today, we have 165 manpower. Our book size is 64. And we are an organization where the business is happening in a zero paper office, which is not believable. That how can a government organization do? Normally, when you talk about corporate governance, people look at TCS and Infosys. They are the first two companies who publish their result first. There is no more TCS and Infosys, TCS and IRIDA. Last 10th of October, we published our quarterly result. Then we came to know that TCS also published same day. We checked, what about Infosys? Generally, we do not look at others. We did not know even also what is the plan of TCS. Now we have announced that next time we will further improvise, we will bring in 9 days. Not limited, we will do full audit. I can guarantee no agency in the country can compete with us with respect to that, because they do not do full audit in 9 days or 10 days. They do limited. What is the meaning of full audit? More sanitization of data, information, records, documents, system, process, procedures. If 165 employees vis-a-vis 179 can do 3.5 times of your business, and we are the quick, our turnaround time in loan application to disbursement, quickest not only in India, quickest in world in project finance space. And we have 27% women power in the company. Largest women representation percentage-wise in any public sector in the country. Private sector, I do not know. Awards, generally, we do not file any awards, and also that's why awards is not important to us. If you look at our product and profile, you talk about any area, we are there. If something is missing, you tell me today. By Monday, we will have a product in our website. Within 2 to 3 days, we can make a policy. Now, this slide is more important. When I'm talking, we have finance 1.33 lakh crores. Our cumulative write-off in last 37 years is only 214 crore. What I am trying to tell, is renewable economical, is renewable business friendly, is renewable financing sustainable or not, that speaks itself. I'll not take your time. She has already reminded me twice. Thank you very much. But I can guarantee you, if you do R&D of IRIDA, PhD on IRIDA analysis, I have a separate presentation for that. Many of the institute is going to do very soon. How your organization can work like this? And that way a government organization. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
What PK did not say is how he and I actually interact is on hospitality tariffs of the India Habitat Center. And every time we meet and we discuss it, we look at him and say, so tell us how we can cut costs further. And he comes up with brilliant ideas. So thank you so much for showing us how this can be possible also in the RE sector. Thank you.
We could reform India Habitat Center's management during peak COVID time.
Yeah.
We had around 5-6 meetings in 45 days time. I can more open on that. One outsourced agency was engaged.
Sorry. Come on. This is all part of normal history that we all do. But the skill is in understanding different sectors and being able to make it work. And that's why my respect for him is enormous. And he's shown that in the IRIDA sector as well. Harish, you need no introduction. Absolutely none. Okay? You are the crowned guru of this sector. Okay? So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for inviting, because itne saalon ke baad hum mil rahe hain. I mean, when somebody says Sunita ji ka email aaya, to fir obviously that you get up in the office, right? नो मैं इरेडा के बात सुन रहा था सर, आपके ऑफिस में झाड़ू क्या 1991 में 92 में Bhaktawatsalam साहब, where three of us were sitting on a Saturday. Bhaktawatsalam, the first IREDA MD, Vora, first MD of Tata Solar. हम लोग बैठे बात कर रहे थे, and suddenly BRP, who was chief secretary of MNRE, suddenly said कि he is going to come. And there was no Saturday, कोई नहीं था. तो वोरा जी बोला कि मैं तो टेबल क्लीन करता हूँ, भक्ता बोला कि मैं जाके चाय देखता हूँ कहाँ है, और बिकॉज आई वाज द यंगेस्ट मेरे को झाड़ू पकड़ा दिए. I had to clean the boardroom of IREDA. So सर मेरे पास होगा सर. No, it was the saying मैंने उस समय 13 लाख का लोन लिया था सर, and which I one of the first loans we took 13 lakhs. अभी obviously IREDA का interest per half an hour is 13 lakhs. So and for 100 houses in 95, 96 we took, and Sunita ji, I would like to also say that October 1994 was the 30 years of our first installation. Which we did in October 1994 of a 40-watt system. And the farmer died, but his wife is still alive. Financed by Syndicate Bank. That point of time in 94 at PLR of 14% interest rates. And we used to say that solar is expensive for the rich and affordable for the poor. Because the poor spend more on energy, on the monthly expenses. And it was financing that was the key. And then we were only pushing Syndicate Bank to finance. And this was when Malaprabha Gramin Bank, one of the Gramin banks in Dharwad, started the first 1,000 loan in 96. And along with that, when we went to IREDA to get a loan for a guarantee mechanism at that time, how do you play with guarantees? And this was in 96. So we were at that point of now not looking at whether a 250 rupees pe kharidte the per watt solar panel. But it was not the cost we were said that comparing it to grid was apples and oranges. What is the convenience, what do you call? So abhi kya hua ki, in a sense, over the period I was telling Sunita ji, we in Selco don't have anybody from energy. In our 250 in the foundation, we have nobody from energy. We have architects, we have system designers, we are agriculturists, we have animal husbandry experts, because end of the day, it is better livelihoods, better health, better education. Energy is like a salt. When you want to prepare dal, you're not going to get a salt expert. You're going to get a dal expert or a pasta expert, right? Salt is just an enabler for it, right? And the way we have to disperse ourselves is like we should infiltrate ourselves into other guys, into the health industry, into the livelihood industry, into the other industry. We most of the time talk to ourselves. And this we realized over a period of time, agar scale karna hai, so simple thing like a North Karnataka, when people talk about North Karnataka, mein roti rolling hota hai, right? Roti banate hai ghar pe, 200 rotis per day, jola ka roti bana ke, that's stored for 6 months. So we basically sat with an entrepreneur who was actually having a roti rolling machine. So a per roti takes 1 minute, 35 seconds to do by hand. So 200 rotis that she would make at home. So this roti rolling machine actually makes 500 rotis to 1,000 rotis on a daily. Now the problem with roti rolling machine is like, when I design solar for a sewing machine, everybody says that solar is expensive. Nobody says that a sewing machine is inefficient, right? So roti rolling machine ke upar humne the efficiency ke upar kaam kiya. Then kya hua ki 200 rotis se now they had a 500 rotis. Now we went to the first 100 people who had the market linkage to sell the extra 300 rotis. It's not you go and put a roti rolling machine. हमने तो photo दिखा दिया, सब खुश. वो बेचारी debt में चलेगी because she didn't know where to sell the extra 300 rotis, right? Then you work with the bank and send which financial product actually matches that extra 300 rotis. Then went to these 5 or 10 houses who are experts, who are already doing roti rolling machine, who had a electric rolling. हमने जाके just solar का डाल दिया बस. ये देख लो. First इसको अगर ये solar fail कर गया, आप you go back to your machine anyways, right? After a month, we quietly removed the machine, right? With a bank loan. We did not say it was solar powered or not solar. It's a roti rolling machine. by the way runs on solar. मेरे को solar को क्यों बीच में डालना है? And you will have your return in 3 years. You are getting a 5-year loan from the bank. And the first 3 roti rolling makers, Allah Baksh, Padmavati and another person, they became roti rolling trainers. So we took them to SKDITP center in Dharwad, where 25,000 women get trained on a monthly basis. After the first month of 20 roti, in the last 3 months, the bank has financed 1,000 solar powered roti rolling machine. किसी ने पूछा electricity है क्या? नहीं, नहीं. क्या पूछा? Is that machine viable? मेरे को उससे मैं इनकम जनरेट करता हूं कि नहीं? हम क्यों जाते हैं पर यूनिट? उनमें और फर्क नहीं पड़ता एंड ऑफ द डे. Is it viable from the banking system perspective? 1,000 rotis rolling machine, right? So what we started doing is that the best thing that happened for us from a strategic point of view, well, a lot of these anthropologists joined Selco, right? Who could think about the pieces of the puzzle per se, right? I had a colleague whose expertise was monkeys, right? Because systems thinkers are that way, right? क्या missing है? Solar power का तो हम किसी को भी बोल देंगे यार design कर लो solar, किसी को. But how do you put the pieces? Financing का, what is roti rolling machine का financing कैसा होना चाहिए? Solar powered sugarcane juicer का financing कैसा होना चाहिए? Silk weaving machine का कैसा होना चाहिए financing? How do you work on the financing? How do you work on the efficiency of the product? And same way we started looking at end में क्या चाहिए? So जैसे राम कुमार को first में हम लोग जाके पूछा, who is the NHM head of Meghalaya, the problem statement was, how do I reduce maternal mortality? He did not say, how do I reduce electricity bills? Right? Boss, okay, we will come with a high efficient way of looking at deployable maternal labor rooms. By the way, run on solar. उस बाद में बोलेंगे, right? That, because the goal of Ram Kumar was to reduce maternal labor rooms. The goal of the roti rolling machine was to increase my income, right? What was the end goal? On sewing machine, how many blouses can I do without any interruption on a daily basis? रात को करूंगी, दिन को करूंगी, it doesn't matter what. How do I reduce for example, a blacksmith blower का फंडा क्या था कि boss, why do I need another person sitting there blowing it? It has to be another wife or a cousin sitting. If I create a blower that would be running on solar, uska, instead of doing 2 sickles a day, he does 8 sickles a day, right? How do you come up with pottery makers, for example, right? How do I reduce? If you look at a lot of the technologies are not designed for women per se. Like even if you have a rice mill and a diesel generation, not only you need a man, but you need a strong man to start the diesel engine, right? A solar powered rice mill, tuck kar diya, suddenly women entrepreneurs came in. Convert the hammer mills into solar powered hammer mills, suddenly women blacksmiths came into place. The concept is, how do you come in from an end user's perspective and de-democratize that? I mean, just an example, right? If I look at dairy value chain, a dairy value chain में क्या होता है? From fodder, then you have the cows, chaff cutter, right? Then you have the, what do you call it as the milking, storage, khoya making. Now in desert, in dry areas, I mean, even in Karnataka, they have your solar powered hydroponics, solar powered shaft cutter, redesign the cow shed because of heat stress. The cows are giving 30% less milk. Same in poultry, because of heat stress, 30% less chicks. Redesign it from a heat stress perspective. Solar powered milking machine. So you save time. So instead of milking 2 cows, you're able to milk 10 cows and you are actually generating income to do. With that income, you're buying 20 cows. Milk chiller, decentralization of storage to add value, solar powered khoya making machine. Now, हम क्या करते हैं? हम लोग supply side से solar, innovation से यहाँ होगा ही नहीं. Suddenly, KMF, the Karnataka Milk Federation, got excited, said, I have 3,000 farmers, कहाँ intervention हो सकता है? 1,500 farmers में से एक खरीदा, एक खरीदा. अगर मैं खाली solar की बात करता, 1,500 farmers would not have got solar. Suddenly I've got scale because I came from this side. Same way in the health industry की अगर बात करें हम लोग, now what happens in the value chain of health? If you look at a sub-center, then you have a PHC, then you have a wellness center, then you have a CHC, then you have a district hospital. Now I have 1,000 services of health services in a human's life, from basic blood pressure and temperature and polio to lung transplant, right? Now think of it. ये services 2030 में ये services कैसे दिया जाएगा? हम लोग क्या बिल्डिंग की बात करते हैं, PHC. Forget PHC. Your blood pressure, your test, diabetes, everything is going to be on a cell phone. So you don't need that space in a PHC at all. I don't need to build. Think of in 1990 when India said that by 2030, 60% of the buildings have not been built. They said we need 100,000 more post offices. In 1990, we will laugh in 2035 कि PHC क्यों बना रहा? Right? We relook at. So मैं बोल रहा हूँ, why should the poor, even if you give medical services free in Delhi, it's not free for the poor to come here, right? The poor have to spend 2 days of time. Or if I created a tele-services small kiosk in the village itself, solar powered, kahin bhi dal diya, because solar is decentralized, uska blood pressure maap ho gaya, got the best directors. Also train the midwives, give them a high-tech television, small one, with a foldable baby warmer. I create every pregnant woman's bedroom as a maternity ward. 5 days before I can create a maternity ward, 5 days later I remove it. You reduce, what was the goal? Reduce maternal mortality, death, not energy. हम लोग energy के ऊपर, salt के ऊपर focus करते हैं. I need nutritious dal. I need mortality deaths to be done. Now think of these 1,000 services. 2030 का देखो क्या हो, technology will change. Suddenly what I am doing? Now people go for upstream. अरे बस सब center में कुछ नहीं होने वाला. So your pressure is on district hospitals and CHCs. By using technology and decentralized energy, you are making it downstream. By doing it downstream, what you are doing? You're making health accessible at the doorstep of the poor. One of the biggest problems of poverty is that the expenses of medical expenses leads to poverty. Using decentralized energy, you're reducing the medical expenses. But what we do is by calculating, by putting decentralized energy, am I reducing their electric bill? No. Why are we thinking in a flatter terms? It's cross-cutting, right? Suddenly the scale changes. So this experiment in the next quarter, I'm doing one more experiment in one of the hospitals is, see, everybody likes to fund CapEx. Nobody wants OpEx, right? This is a cancer hospital that does in a rural area, and so the very brilliant cancer, and uska funda straight hai. If a person comes for cancer treatment, test ke liye, the person will never come back the second day because the cost of coming to the hospital itself is expensive. So what he has done is, he has done brilliant ki boss subah aaya, raat ko report de dega. Okay. Now uska electricity cost zyada hai, but he gives free service, this one, cancer service free to the poor in the Silchar area because mouth cancer is the highest in the country. So I said, boss, OpEx ke liye tera to paisa nahi tha, main solar dal raha hu CapEx tere liye. Tera CapEx mein X electricity bach raha na, X is leading to 1,000 more patients getting free cancer treatment. So you don't need to rate CapEx for your 1,000. But the beauty of the 1,000, agar you do 1,000 more getting free, that means 2,000 people are going to come on a monthly basis to his hospital, because for every cancer patient, there's one able-bodied person coming. We are creating a livelihood center in that waiting area of the hospital with silk weaving, with da. Are you getting inspired? You will get a loan. You take back a livelihood center back home as an insurance. Suddenly you reach scale, right? अब हम लोग बोलते हैं ना, बच्चे लोग क्या बोलते हैं? टीचर ने बोला मैं सुनता, डॉक्टर ने बोला इसलिए आई एम डूइंग दिस लाइवलीहुड. You're going to a place of trust. So how are you linking energy to health to livelihoods? So you're blurring the boundaries between SDG 3, SDG 7, and SDG 8. Right? You are very healthy, but no livelihoods. SDG 8 ka fayda kya hai? You have brilliant livelihood, no health. What is the point of it? So these SDGs don't make sense at all, right? Until you don't merge them. If you start blurring these boundaries, your scale will happen. But why are we only stuck on the supply side? Up supply side could be karo, ab poverty nahi hone wala. And suddenly you start looking at this, your scale will happen. The point is, how do we teach cross-cutting program design thinking? We don't need engineers. We need engineers, architects, but एक room में you need a finance guy, an engineer, an architect, a systems thinker, and an anthropologist. You'll come up with much better design. Same way, when we went to Manipur and Meghalaya, they had World Bank money to do 450 new labor rooms. So हम लोग बोला, wait. So we brought in architects. We redesigned the labor rooms with multiple high efficiency more, both, and pushed GEs and Philips to look at high efficient baby warmers, autoclaves, etc. दिखाया 3, and suddenly हम लोग 3 दिखाए. मेघालय बोला कि now they are investing is under 297. Scale up हो गया ना. Now राम कुमार जाके दूसरा NHM head लक्ष्मणन in Assam को बोल रहा तुम करो मैंने किया. Because अगर मैं गया वो तो selfish interest है, तेरे को तो सोलर बेचना है, right? और करना है. Suddenly that is where the scale needs to happen. So that is when our success is when Sunita ji is called for as a keynote speaker in the health industry, in the livelihood industry. Doctors Association's meeting mein, one doctor is saying, Mera aisa hua, because of which more number of patients got service, not how much electricity I saved. You change the narrative, your scale will actually change completely. And that is what our industry has always pushed on. One, we need to bifurcate. It's sometimes a joke that if our Ministry of Energy should close and you create ministries of energy in all other ministry, you'll suddenly see a scale up happening. Because abhi kya hum school kar liye hain, uske baad mere ko solar chahiye, and I am getting blamed for the inefficient building design of the school. अरे आपका सोलर तो बहुत एक्सपेंसिव है, बट आपका बिल्डिंग एंड डिजाइन ही इनएफिशिएंट है ना. So how do you relook at, and that's where the scale will happen, and that's what I think we should. Thank you very much.
Harish, you are rightly called the guru. No, this is, to me, what we've heard today in the morning, and we're going to break for tea now and come back to 2 more, and then I'll open it up for discussions. You know what? The excitement is palpable. And I hope you all sharing that. All of us, have shared with you our genuine excitement of how this is possible. And each area tells me of the different opportunities. I mean, clearly, this is not an either or. This is an and business, okay? This is about getting supply done at a time when there's no question about competition anymore. And the question is now the next generation of regulations, of innovation, that you can make sure that the supply, whatever bottlenecks, get sorted out, because that supply is possible to do. What we hear from PK is how you can make sure that you can have a lending business for such a critical sector, but you can do it in a way that you can actually make that lending work. And the fact is you don't have bad loans. If you don't have bad loans, it means that sector is performing. And that is, it's a tribute to you as an institution, but it's also a tribute to the sector. And what you hear from Harish is, if you take energy out of energy and you put it in the hands of people and you look at the objective for what they need, you can actually make sure that it becomes a driver and a game changer for livelihoods, for health, for just the well-being that we need in this country. So, I'm absolutely thrilled to have heard all of them. And I hope you'll all share that and give them a big round of applause. And then we'll come back. And we'll come back for the continue. Thank you. but it hasn't finished. And I have, Rahul is here. And I will, because I want a little time for questions, discussions. So maybe lunch we will push by 15 minutes, only 15. We have a treat for lunch as well. So Manu, we do work on food, as you know, CSC's main work is on food. So we have a recipe book called First Food, and we will be giving you food from it, which is local, nutritious food, which is biodiversity rich. Okay, so that's also going to be, you may be getting some food that people have picked from the trees here. So wait. So we cannot miss lunch. So let me now move to Rahul. Rahul, can you take over from here and help us in this journey, how we are going to move on?
Thank you. If you could help, please load the slide. Yeah, V2. Yeah. So,
Yes.
yes, please. So I'm here standing between you and lunch, problem one. Problem two, a lot of what I was going to say has already been said. Now, in general, everyone says that who's late in a discussion, except I have slides with the content so I can prove that we're all on the same page. But the third real point is what's holding us back? And there's so many key takeaways that I want to sort of bring from what has been said. Manuji talked about complexity. Harish talked about the ecosystem problem. These are really the challenges. And what we're trying to do is get rapid and equitable. And the question is, are they compatible? How or how not? So I'm Rahul Tonge. I'm a scholar for about 30 years now in this space. So question to everyone, is RE cheap? Cheaper than coal? Sunita ji started with that sort of few numbers. How many of you think RE is cheap? So if RE is cheap, then why do I need an RPO? Because that was an instrument for a different time. So, you know, my favorite answer to whenever my students ask a question is, it depends. Now, of course, our job is to understand what it depends on and why. So our objective function, and Harish sort of really emphasized this, is RE is a means to an end. We want secure, cheap, affordable, clean, etc. energy. So traditionally, worldwide, people talk about this as a trade-off. And decarbonization is just one of N changes going through the power system. So I'm going to talk 10 minutes-ish about the centralized system, the 500 target, not as much about decentralized. There are three main issues that we need to solve. First is the volatility problem or intermittency. It's a well-known and global problem. It's a little worse in India because we are coal heavy and we are solar heavy. Our wind resources are inferior to parts of the world. Then there's an integrated planning and deployment problem, which at one extreme you could say, well, are there problems with the bids? It's not the bids or the stakeholders, it's the process that I think doesn't have that feedback loop. You've got a lot of push, where is the pull? And the third is, where are the prices and signals for this space? So until we solve these problems, what we're left with is a lot of top-down targets. Now, targets are useful, but they can also crowd out alternatives. And I start with this question that why is everything treated as a supply side problem? So today we have RE heavily driven by RPOs and bids. And we'll see a little bit of the limitations, and the questions you flagged, Sunita, in the morning, I think are really the key questions. So as of now, it's changing. Now there is, in the last 1 year, 2 years, more recognition, limited worry about TOD, time of day. Our surplus coal, quote unquote, till 2016, we actually had surplus coal to the point of non-performing assets in the generation side. They helped because what we could then do is we could grow RE willy-nilly because we didn't need to worry about RE's capacity value. We only could enjoy its energy value. That luxury is now gone. So what do we bid for? We do not bid for power. We bid for power plants. Once that, so not only do we bid for power plants, we don't bid in a purely integrated manner. We usually have separate bids for a coal plant, separate bids for a solar, or a hybrid, or a with storage. But once we've bought that plant, we're locked into whatever it gives us. And the key thing that we have to figure out is risk, because our entire system is based on a pass-through of risks. This pass-through is not just with PPAs, which are well known. Think of Koila. It starts with FSA, fuel supply agreements, which are also lock-ins. And Coal India Limited is a de facto monopoly. It's not a statutory monopoly. It's a de facto monopoly. And states are beholden to access to coal at sort of sometimes higher prices, but more than prices in those contracts, you have an offtake obligation of a quantum of coal. Now, in a high RE world, and Manuji talked about the technical minimum problem, how do you balance this that I want less coal, but yet I still want coal? Our pricing frameworks haven't squared that circle. So what's the fundamental issue holding us back? Is it finance? I think it can be found. Is it the economics? Well, that's complicated depending on how you're measuring it. And so Sunita talked about this in their slides. Why aren't we adding the RE? So SECI already has a lot of bids with no off-taker. See, I told you we were on the same page. But the real interesting question is, why aren't we adding the quantum of RE that is absorbable today and, to build on Manuji's point, market viable at marginal cost calculations as well? That is a fundamental question that needs to be understood. Why aren't DISCOMs or the system doing it? And then we know there are DISCOM finance problems. There's political economy problems. We should not treat these as secondary, but actually primary to this ecosystem problem. So why do states resist more RE? First, as was said before, old RE competes with new RE. There is both practical experience, but also a mindset that says, look, RE is only going to get cheaper. So therefore, my old RE, the 5, 6, forget the 20 rupee solar, is still looked at as very expensive compared to 2, 2.5, 2.75, etc. So if your expectation is it's only going to fall over time, you will only buy the bare minimum that you think you want, not what you can absorb. We still have enough PPAs. The RE-rich states, these are a handful of 7, 8 states in India. They already have a lot of PPAs in place for their demand. So for them, adding more RE means adding more PPAs. That's the next issue of how do we scale or not scale. So what the states will tell you is, look, I'll take RE, but I still need the Koila or something else to worry about the evening and the night. And we'll talk about RTC, FDRE in a second. So even though our peak in India has now moved to a midday peak, and we run a website called carbontracker.in. Online, you can see 5-minute resolution, supply, demand, fuel-wise across all India live last 5 years. So you can see that the peak is midday, but the net load or net demand peak is still in the evening. And that is really going to be India's challenge going forward. Capacity problem, not an energy problem. So if they still need the coal, then the comparison becomes RE's total cost versus coal's marginal cost or variable cost. And coal's marginal cost is entirely a locational issue. If you're near the pithead, you avoid the railway's tax. I call it a tax because you're paying beyond the physical costs of transportation, you're paying for passengers as well. And what about storage? Wouldn't that solve it? Well, hold that thought. So there's other facets I won't get into. Manufacturing, domestic manufacturing jobs, we can get back to in the discussion. Here is an analysis that's about to come out, a colleague and I at CSEP, where we look at 450 or 485 RE for 2030 with incremental demand for 2030, where we apply a time of day and say, okay, let's assume all of this demand is supposed to be met with RE. And by RE, I specifically here mean wind and solar, just as a thought exercise. The red line shows you the incremental demand in gigawatts through 2030. It's not the total demand, it's the incremental demand. And what you notice is it's relatively flat across the time blocks. These are 8760 hours. So each vertical could be thought of as a day, and that's 365 of them to give you the full year. The green is what a mix of wind and solar would give you. The totals for both of these are the same. Well, first problem, we're not even adding this much RE as our targets. We're behind schedule. Even if you meet it, what do you see? Well, this volatility problem is not so trivial. Of course. So if I add 450 or 480, I mean, RE, the y-axis is the incremental demand, new RE versus new demand till 2030. I'm trying to just compare new to new. This is not your total. So your red line is what your demand growth per time block would look like over a year. And your green would be what your new RE supply, not what we have already. Your new wind and solar would be till 2030. And the totals are the same. We've set it up to work backwards to say that, okay, let's say the total is the same, but you can clearly see that different time blocks, I'm going to be both surplus and deficit, you often in the same day, which is pretty obvious because let's remember India's trajectory, you look at the RPOs, are solar heavy. Solar has a very well-known shape. There is some stochasticity, volatility, but it's relatively predictable with limited seasonality compared to wind. So this is challenge number one. So then you would say that, well, if these two areas are the same, why don't I just use storage to swap them? And I'll come to that. Now, first problem is even this uncertainty is going to get much, much worse. RE has volatility. We don't have a good handle on the demand side of pictures. So the demand side, what we really need is TOD curves by consumer type. Why? Because the type determines the what and the where, which is a local problem for the discoms. Second, and also you've got a huge rise in behind the meter, like rooftop solar, captive, banking, group captive, all of these things which help RE place burdens upon the discom. And let's say I did do retail TOD pricing. Manuji, you talked about Madhya Pradesh has started it. If I actually do the math and do a re-equilibrium of the cost structure to revenues to the discom, I'd have to raise household prices and lower industry prices because household load is not so solar coincident. Agri is the most flexible, the feeders example that you gave. Industry, especially single shift, which is the bulk of our employment, MSME, is solar aligned. So they would get lower prices. That's a political economy challenge. So these are data from Karnataka. This paper came out last year. Just I wanted to emphasize that even though, so this is the daily output, this is the 30-day moving average in the middle, and the bottom line is the 12-month moving average over time for Karnataka, for all the wind turbines. And what we see is that the CUF on an annual basis actually can fall measurably. So from 21%, you could fall down to 17% despite higher hub heights over time. So climatic factors are going to create a lot more uncertainty for your planning purposes. So the fundamental challenge, this is our heat map of our demand in 2022. The x-axis is 24 hours. And the y-axis is 365 days. And you can see that most of our energy requirement is middle of the day, evening, and a little bit morning. So and this is where CEA's current planning is let's say demand grows 6%. I'm making up a number. Then your pro rata base shape is what I showed you before, that red line in that graph. This is what your incremental demand will be at a 6% growth. This is the shape. But now let's look at what actually happened between 2019 and 22. Your delta or incremental growth per time block was nowhere near this shape. It was disproportionately middle of the day. Now that's a good thing because it's solar aligned. The question is, can that scale? Once we exhaust agricultural shifting like you're doing with feeders, like we're doing with Kusum and some other things, then what? What happens when EVs grow more? And by the way, EVs are going to charge disproportionately in the evening because they're mobile in the middle of the day, especially fleets. So if that happens and you do it based on the trend, this is the actual demand increase that you would need. Same area under the curve, same kilowatt hours, just different shapes. And this TOD and shape problem is completely unsolved. But I do agree with that earlier assessment where you asked the question, I think, Manuji, if someone's trying to study for the exam and they're asking, should I study 9 hours a day or 10 hours a day? If you're studying 2 today, let's do 3 and 4 and 5 first before we worry about that. But the time is not too far where we do need to worry about how will it add up. So notice that we will need vastly more, 50-ish gigawatts more of midday supply. Were we planning for it? And the answer is probably not. So won't storage solve the problem? The last point I'll sort of come to. And we've already heard a lot about economics. People say, is it cheap? Cheap enough? Because cheap is the wrong term. First problem with a lot of these bids that are out there, they assume 2 cycles when doing the economics daily. You don't, I mean, how are you going to charge it when your solar is only going to give you the surplus in the middle of the day? So the second cycle would need to come from fossil fuel, perhaps. Bigger problem is how do we charge it? Forget what source it comes from. How do we charge it? Importantly, from a planning perspective, batteries have a fuel, meaning they have to be charged. So even though it's a fixed cost investment, you still have an OpEx and it's not free. So one of these beliefs that I want to puncture is, well, you want to be surplus. So therefore that surplus is just going to be free bijli to charge your battery. Here's why that fails. So on the left-hand side, so what we did is we looked at the daily cycle for India. And daily is important because that's how you charge your battery with solar. So on the left-hand side are 365 days with red being the surplus, red being the deficit and green being the surplus out of that RE matching that we talked about till 2030. You can see seasonality that on the left side in the middle of the year, green is greater than the red, but not so much in the others. So if you just reorder it into a load duration curve, as it's called, or orderly stacking. So the red is maximum to minimum of your deficit each day. And on the same day, the green dots are how much is your surplus. What do you see? They're opposite in direction. So what that means is the day I have the maximum deficit, I have the minimum surplus and vice versa. I can't do anything with it. There is no storage available, be it pumped hydro system or battery that could use it. These are all daily designed storage. So we need seasonal shifting storage as well for India. So ultimately what we need is to recognize that cost, price, and value are not the same. The value of RE in the middle of the day is eventually soon going to collapse to zero. You already have worldwide with negative prices in a lot of markets. Even in India, there's a spread. If you go to the PX, power exchange prices, between middle of the day and the evening, evenings are typically at the cap. So we will need to curtail, and that cost has to be socialized. We have a paper on that, how to do it. So what we'll need is different policies to scale us to 500. First, add VRE, variable RE. Don't even worry about storage. The good news is in the short run, that's viable. So that fundamental question comes back. Why aren't we adding even what's viable without storage today? Then we have to manage the volatility, and surplus and deficit are 2 different problems. Third, we want to plateau the use of our fossil fuels. I think getting rid of our fossils is too ambitious a short-term goal. So we should focus on how do we slow down the growth of fossils, plateau it, and then worry about ending our fossil fuels. So we shouldn't worry about 100% decarbonization yet. We should look for 80-20 sort of Pareto, because that last 10 to 20% decarbonization is very, very expensive to do reliably. And for a country like India, that shouldn't be our short-term perspective. For the rich, though, as PK pointed out, they've already burnt a lot and gone further. They have to go to 100%. We have to overcome levelized cost of energy. Levelized cost of energy is what people use to compare wind versus solar or project A versus B, Koila, because you're averaging it out. Levelized cost is an averaging that assumes a steady usage or a certain notional PLF. It ignores duty cycle. But as we saw on some days, you don't even need a battery. RE is good enough. LCOE ignores transmission, especially the incremental additional transmission that will be differentially expensive. You talked about adding the ISTS cost as a requirement. You back down your other plants. This decreases their efficiency, creates wear and tear. We're not saying don't do it. It's still viable to do it, but we have to price it in and signal it correctly. We'll need more backup power. What do you do if there's a no windy period unexpectedly at the wrong time? We'll need more ramping requirements, and in the long run, inertia to keep the grid stable. LCOE is why wind looks costlier than solar. It's one of the reasons we're not adding enough wind, despite having domestic manufacturing capability, unlike solar for the scales what we need. So what else should we do? Avoid greenwashing. We have a whole separate paper, I won't go into it, on how we define the taxonomy problems. Banking is not the right solution. Delhi Metro, is still reliant on banking, which works up to a point, but it won't take us all the way there. It hurts the DISCOM because that arbitrage burden is still borne by the utilities. And second, it isn't additively green. We want to also be cautious about subsidizing the rich. As we do this, we see this with EVs, rooftop solar, and we have a whole session around this in the afternoon that I'm looking forward to. Who is putting up, even under Pradhan Mantri newer scheme? These are not the 1-2 kilowatt households. For them, it doesn't add up. It's bigger. Worse, political economy. We have free power given in a lot of states. Now, I'm not against supporting the poor. The question is, these thresholds are so high that you're subsidizing the upper middle class, if not the rich. So free power removes your incentives to save energy. That's just a bad policy in general. And the last thing we need to do is avoid average-based planning, incorporate volatility, and as researchers, we need better data to help us help the government do it. So I'm not going to go into all the things we can do at a supply side, demand side. The slides will be available. But what we will need is skilled human capacity. That's one of the bottlenecks to growing our systems. So we need action. RE is important. It's a subset of supply. Supply is a subset of supply and demand. It's your end use that matters. And coal, let us be clear, it remains, in fact, it grows through 2030. So we shouldn't ignore it. We should make it cleaner, and we should make it more flexible and RE friendly. DISCOMs remain the weak link, and managing winners and losers is going to be the real public policy challenge for the energy transition, not just enough supply. Thank you.
Yes.
I think this is another key point, and we discussed this over tea. We keep coming up with new instruments like RTC, FDRE, and they may help, but they're not sufficient by any stretch. And these sort of complicated bids often pass on risks downstream is all that they do. And if you actually look through all these bids in detail, as many of you would have done, they're not really 24/7. They're giving 2 hours. They're oversizing their way to getting higher firmness. So that only works up to a point. So this is where we have to be cautious of labels and get our narratives right of what's real. And I think someone here put it best. We cannot ignore cost because equity starts with affordability. But I'm also aware, as Harishji pointed out, it's not that is it cheap enough? Is it giving you enough value? That's the metric that we should be using. Thank you.
Thank you, Rahul. I think I mean, thank you. You've kind of helped to help to get our head around a lot of the issues and get them into, so this is where we need to go. And that's really what we had expected. So thank you very much. Kaushik.
Thanks, Sunita. Thank you, first of all, to Nevit, Sunita, and CSC for inviting me here. It's hard to ever say no to an invitation from Sunita, but it's even harder to say no to an invitation to come to a place like Nimli and spend time. Hey, this is such a fantastic campus. I really hope you call me back again. And spend much longer time here. But having kind of expressed my gratitude, may I also register a small complaint? Putting me at this point in this session isn't really very kind. Each of the gentlemen and you, Sunita, who've kind of preceded me, have pretty much been able to deliver a masterclass in the limited time that you had. And each one of you could do a masterclass over a period of a week on each of these things that you've talked about. So for me to kind of step in at this point and try and not say things that have already been said is a very, very tall ask. I'll try my best, so please bear with me and please don't hold it against me. It's all their fault. The Energy Policy Institute at the University of Chicago focuses a lot of work that we do in the electricity sector, principally coming from the Department of Economics at the University of Chicago. This is Milton Friedman's school, right? Everything is about pricing, incentives, disincentives. So a lot of the work that we've done in the electricity sector also primarily focuses on the distribution sector and how improving efficiency, billing collection, etc., make a big difference to making discoms work better. But what I'm going to focus on in the presentation today is perhaps a somewhat lighter, a somewhat more positive description of how I see our pathway to 2030 and to 500 gigawatts and what that actually does mean. It does not at all discount from all of the challenges that have been described earlier today and the fact that we still have a large amount of work to do. But just to kind of recognize where we are as a nation and where we would want to get to, we now claim every household in the country is connected to the grid. So presumably, there is an opportunity for everyone to be able to use electricity, as Harish described, in a manner to live more productive lives, if not more comfortable lives. Electricity is an enabler. And now that we have this really important enabler as we consider it, available to everyone, presumably all of us can be happier about it. We'll see. There's a piece that the University of Chicago printed a little while back, which kind of talked about what's the actual impact that this access to electricity is having on household prosperity. And we found that the impact on household prosperity, increase in per capita incomes or household incomes, happens only beyond a threshold of electricity consumption. So if you're just consuming a few kilowatts during the course of a week, it really isn't making a difference to you. It might mean that you are able to watch more television or more stuff on your cell phone screens, but as a productive activity, it still requires a whole bunch of other enablers that I think Harish kind of described so eloquently that I won't even go there. But remember that this is just one piece of the puzzle. But this one piece of the puzzle is fairly chunky. Our per capita energy consumption is less than a half of the non-OECD average. Of the developing countries, it's less than half of that. It's about a third or about a fourth of the global electricity consumption. And not to compare with even another of our aspirational countries, China. Everyone wants to be the next China, right? But remember, if India just goes from where it's consuming the amount of per capita electricity today to the non-OECD average, guess how much more electricity capacity that we would need? And this is kind of general thermal capacity. I'm not talking about capacity utilization factors of about 20% that we see in renewables. We are looking at about 900 gigawatts of more thermal capacity needed to get us just to the non-OECD average. So we need to kind of be able to think about development very, very differently than has been done in the past. If for all intents and purposes, we don't want to break the global carbon budget. I won't even get into the equity or the justice issues here, but just to remember that the amount of energy that we're consuming right now is pretty minuscule for a country of our size and the aspirations of becoming a developed nation by 2047. That was the first point. The second point, just to kind of re-emphasize what our renewable energy targets have been. Right from 2015 onwards, when the Prime Minister delivered his famous speech at the UN Sustainable Development Conference, until now, we've ramped up our ambition. And Rahul talked about the need for having targets and meeting those targets and whether those targets actually mean anything. Manu had this really fantastic storyboard as to whether those targets actually mean anything or not. But for all intents and purposes, we are a country today which is mission driven. For everything, we have a mission. And those missions kind of deliver on targets. And sometimes they deliver on targets to right to the exact decimal point, which is, which is a remarkable achievement. I mean, there's no stochasticity there. But these targets are material, right? There's someone who is actually putting in money to get these things done. And as much as these targets have kind of ramped up over time, they mean something or they may not mean anything. So let me kind of do the following two things. The first, talk about this target of 500 gigawatts of non-fossil electricity by 2030. What we've done over the last 7 years has been exceptional. Our growth in renewable energy capacity has been upwards of or close to 13 gigawatts a year. This has been the third largest increment globally, following, of course, China and the US. So DK, you were kind of talking about no one in the world has done this better than us. Well, the US, of course, but look at China. I mean, they seem to kind of gobble up anything that they do, including renewable electricity. But the target that we've set ourselves up for, 500 gigs in 2030 from about 209 odd that we have today, essentially means 50 gigawatts every year going forward. No country in the world has ever done this. The only country that's kind of exceeded this is China when it did 83 gigs, I think in the year 2019, 2020. And that's pretty much going to be the only country in the world which will actually ramp up renewable energy capacity faster and larger than anywhere else. The huge increases in renewable energy capacity that we've seen globally over the last 10 years are really, really encouraging, remarkable, and give us a lot of confidence that we will at some point be able to get to a 2.5 degree world or a 2 degree world, probably not a 1.5 degree world. But that's a false promise because almost all of this increase, this is a complete side note from the conversation that we're having today. All of this increase in capacity is mostly happening in China. This is not happening in Congo. This is not happening in Nigeria. This is not happening in South Africa. This is not happening in Lakshadweep and Maldives, right? So a large part of the world still, for them, renewable energy, renewable electricity is far more expensive than any fossil-based solution. So let's not kind of forget that one little fact. But of course, I just wanted to put the right-hand panel there just to show that when we do set up our targets, we also have the penchant of redefining what those targets mean. So our formal commitment to the world is that we will get to a certain share of our electricity mix capacity by 2030. Very, very different from what the Prime Minister said in Glasgow. Again, a side note. But those targets seemingly are so easily achievable today that you can want to ask yourself the question that if as a country we want to define and deliver everything on a mission mode, why don't we do that? Why didn't we have a more ambitious target on that? We'll be back. A sidelight to this slide is the fact that the share of non-fossil and particularly renewable energy outside of hydro has increased very, very significantly in terms of total capacity. That's not the case with generation, which again then kind of begs the question that if we really wanted to deliver on the things that Rahul was talking about, why didn't we set up a target for the share of electricity consumption to come from renewables or non-fossil? One final note on this slide, and then I'll move on. Nuclear. The confusion around nuclear is spectacular. We have about 7 odd gigs today. Our ambition, as per DEA and everything that the Ministry of Power does not say, is to get to 22 gigs by 2032. But CEA's optimal electricity mix for the year 2030 has only 15 gigs of nuclear. So there is something missing there. And how are we going to get to 15 or 22 is an interesting question, especially because for all intents and purposes, nuclear is our most viable option to coal today in terms of base load. And if we wanted to peak coal in our electricity mix, that would probably be the quickest route. But a conversation for another day. Okay, our challenges. This has been talked about quite a bit today, so I will not spend any amount of time doing this, except to note, as PK said, that the vast majority of our renewable energy capacity, overwhelming majority of our renewable energy capacity, sits with the private sector. So if folks in the private sector are doing this, as Manu said, they are not doing this for the goodwill of humanity. They are not doing it for the polar bear who's going to get drowned because the ice caps are melting. They are in this for the money. And they are in this for the money, as we kind of see. The big solar revolution in this country started essentially when KKR stepped in with their cash. If there is such a large interest from the private sector in deploying renewable energy in the country, clearly financing isn't the problem that we want to solve. But this should not lead you to believe that renewable energy is cheaper than coal or thermal of any other nature. And that's kind of that's been a theme of the conversation until now, and that may be one point of disagreement between some of us. You see, every project that's realized today, every bid that's put up, and you see that number come out, and that number is cheaper than, say, the number for thermal, is peculiar to that one project and that one particular site. It's not a global general national average. It's almost a tautology. Those projects come online because they are cheaper, just like there are those projects that don't come online because they are not cheaper. That's the accounting or math that no revealed outcome will give you information on. So just think this through. Renewable energy is cheaper as long as it is, and then it's not. The word that wasn't discussed today or mentioned today is transmission. The draft National Electricity Plan Part 2 dealing with transmission is out now. I don't think it's been notified yet, but it does talk about transmission very extensively. And there is a fairly ambitious target for growth between now and 2027, and then the next 5 years until 2032. Both in terms of the transmission network, but also in terms of the fixed physical infrastructure that will be required to be put in place. For whatever it's worth, the draft NEP Part 2 is fairly optimistic in terms of being able to deal with over 500 gigs of non-fossil dominated by renewable energy. At this point, I don't have a strong opinion on whether they are okay with their math or not. But one thing that we've seen, and one thing that we've kind of talked about earlier today, is the state load, the load dispatch centers essentially aren't delivering on growth in renewable energy consumption as we would like them to. I am a lot more cautious and a lot more hesitant to name names, but the kind of curtailment that's happening of renewable at the load dispatch centers, who is it truly meant to benefit? Certainly not the RE producers, certainly not the consumers. There's someone, and you can kind of guess who in the middle, who kind of gets the benefit out of that. The other piece that I wanted to kind of flag, and now that we have Supreme Leader Trump coming into power in the US, we'll see how this kind of continues. He very, very surely would want to continue a version of the world where free money flows through, and has been very, very active. Maybe he does get rid of the entire leadership at the Federal Reserve Bank, and we go back to getting cheap money. But one thing is important to note, that if interest rates rise, if inflation remains a concern, our ability to deliver these cheap tariffs, especially these cheap tariffs on a perpetual basis, is going to be challenged. No economist in their right mind, no monetary economist or macroeconomist in their right mind would ever give you a version of the world where you would have low interest rates or zero interest rates continue forever. If that's the scenario that you're kind of describing, you're kind of essentially describing economies which are basket cases. Japan in the 90s. China very close to where it's going to be now. US during COVID or pre-COVID. So in a normal world, you would have reasonable interest rates. And each of these reasonable interest rate basis points costs money in terms of what you realize as end tariffs. And that's kind of just something that we need to internalize, that the 2 odd or 3 odd per unit bids that we've seen until now may not have necessarily accounted for the real cost of money. I'm going to finish here and hope that there is now time for question, answers, and conversations, and I haven't taken too much time. Thank you.
Great short session, but I do want to get some questions in from all of you. I'll request the panel to hold on to not answering immediately, because I also want some discussion amongst, I want some issues that you may have raised that you would like to discuss as well. So questions that are there from the audience, anything, burning question? There, yes, then I have one.
Hi, I'm Jaideep from Vasudha Foundation. So my question is that, Rahul, you talked about the entire, scenario analysis that you have already done. I wanted to ask you whether you have looked at IBRs, so inverter-based resources. And at this point of time, if we look at IBRs, those are mostly grid sensing based. So there is already a grid, and then the RE can provide power to the grid. However, going forward, there has been research going on where IBRs define the grid itself. So have you looked at that possibility, and what are those? And if yes, then what are the results?
Will you hold on to that? I don't know what an IBR is, but you can explain that. These new technical things that are emerging in our world faster. So I have a question to, I guess, Kaushik and more Rahul, Manu's not here. This whole question about RE being asked to step down. And the question I have is, it's a must-run sector. So how does it get asked to step down, number one? Manu, question I'm asking is that RE is a must-run sector. And if you remember, our fight was to get gas into the must-run sector. How then does RE get asked to ramp down? I know about the wind in Tamil Nadu, but overall, also, given the fact that coal is public sector, RE is private sector, it's actually, knowing India as we all do, Public sector always gets the last priority, okay? So as India has changed quite a bit now, private sector gets, its wheels sorted out. So how does this play out? Maybe we can start with these two first questions on the must run and the scheduling. And the first question to you, just 1 minute, Manu. There was a question to Rahul on something which I don't understand.
It's actually something you deal with here at the Institute. So if I got it correctly, I'm expanding the question a little bit, Jaideep. Traditional solar inverters were such that they use the grid as a frequency stabilizing to get to when you feed in. If you're grid connected, if you're isolated, you don't care, you do what you want. But when you're grid interconnected, one, there's that interconnection at a technical level, but two, from a safety perspective, the rule is it'll first check, is the grid on? If the grid is off, let's say there's a fault, you have to shut down as well. So for safety reasons that you don't feed in power when they're trying to fix the line downstream. Now the problem then becomes is, look, I've got solar, I've got an inverter, and yet I'm down because your grid is down. So that has been technologically solved through hybrid inverters that can do isolation independent of the grid with a little change in design. They're just not the norm, and they're a little more expensive. So that's the bottleneck that's there for these technologies. So I think it's a work in progress to some extent. The larger question you flagged, I'll wait for others to jump in, but we have some analysis on that, but I'll first request others to just.
I would say that, see, I don't think that is really that much of a challenge, the must-run not being followed. Must-run is usually followed, but there are sometimes situations when thermal plant, you can switch on or switch off, with the click of a button. So the only plants where it is possible are hydro and gas, which you can, but coal-based you cannot. There is a certain ramp up and ramp down rate beyond which it cannot operate. So I would think that the situations would be only where there is a sudden decrease in demand or a sudden increase in, for example, wind that you have not planned for, and you cannot decrease your thermal that fast. So it's only in those situations. And anyway, I think in the situations, the generation compensation should be provided. So it is not that much of a financial challenge. Yeah.
That the generation
Deemed
compensation, deemed generation.
Deemed generation, as
Mm.
it is.
Kaushik, you want to add to this?
So just kind of a couple of minor details. The argument for curtailment is grid safety.
Hmm.
And the load dispatch center has complete discretion in claiming grid safety unless kind of you really want to go and challenge that with any appellate authority. So I can claim grid safety and I can do that. Now, what's my motivation for doing that? I have a power purchase agreement with a thermal power plant as well. So as much as this has a must-run status, the DISCOM has to pay their bills. Now, which way would they want to lean is, and finally, thermal is significantly in the public sector, but increasingly now, not exclusively. So we have some very well-known private sector operators in the thermal space who maybe have equally influential role there.
But I think what Rahul said was so well put that we're actually at a time when we cannot get out of coal. We need coal, but we need to phase it down. And in this new world, we need to phase in renewable. And what you're saying is, therefore, this marriage of convenience or inconvenience, how will it actually shape in the future? And currently, it just seems to be heading towards a divorce. So tell us.
I think we have to appreciate scale, because I think you had done it, that
Yeah.
RE is still 13% of our
Yeah.
energy.
Generation.
Generation-wise,
I mean,
energy,
in
energy-wise.
consumption,
Yes,
yeah.
energy-wise, not capacity-wise. Now, when it grows, whether it's 2030, 29, 32, a few years here or there is irrelevant. I mean, quite honestly, I'm less worried about meeting the targets, quote unquote, because we're getting towards them. A little bit plus minus is going to happen. And they're very ambitious targets. As
But
Patrick
we are
said.
meeting the targets because now we have added hydro to that target. So, let's all of us be a little, I mean, it's good. I have no problem. This is an international target. I'm happy that the Indian government can go and tell the world we've met the target. But as
Well,
Indians
I'm not
sitting
even
here,
going to question whether we do
Huh.
or don't.
Huh.
That's not
Huh.
for this forum.
huh,
But at the scales that we have on the table, at 500 solar heavy, which is what our RPO is, and with the reality that coal does have a flex terminal limit, let's call it 55% for lack, it is worse in older plants. You can do better with newer plants or with retrofits is where we need to put effort. Let's call it for argument's sake 55% because that's the CEA spec. And you need it in the evening. You can do the math of how much has to run in the middle of the day. And you look at periods of low demand, like on a weekend, you're going to be in major curtailment. It's not a little bit of noise. You're going to be in tens of percent
of curtailment of thermal,
No, RE.
RE.
Because your thermal has to run. RE can be disconnected. With thermal, there's an inertia problem. You can't just burn it and not consume
But
it.
Manu's suggestion, which I thought was very interesting, was technical capacity, run the plant only
To the minimum is what the
minimum that
55
is
was.
required.
55%.
But I would say that even if we end up curtailing the renewable plant, and of course paying for the generation compensation, even then the rate of RE would increase marginally. Even then it is better than the cost of thermal power. So it makes sense to oversize, even at the risk of curtailment, than to have to be conservative in terms of our RE plan.
100% agree, because the value, the risk on curtailment is at worst equal to the marginal cost of
Yes.
RE. While by oversizing your buffer, you're avoiding storage and avoiding load shedding is costs a lot more.
Let us say that you have to curtail for, let's say, 20% of the time.
Huh.
Then what happens? Like we discovered 2.15 2 days back. Add 20% to that. So how much is it?
Yeah.
It's still
So then
worth
it's 250.
Yeah.
So it's so much more sense. So right now, curtailment is something like I mean, that heavens would fall if we curtail. Rather, I would say it should become a part of our planning. That fine.
So the
we curtail
marriage
that
has to
extent.
be one of, in a sense, where the convenience is for both. What we're saying is thermal has to give in. So
I would say that
thermal will
thermal has
also have to reduce.
We have to look in terms of the physical limitations of thermal. Like, I mean, it said about the British Constitution or the British Parliament, sorry, that it can do everything. I mean, it was said when the such operations were not possible, but it was said that it can do everything but except to convert man into woman and man into woman to man. The idea being that you cannot make anyone do something that is impossible. So for thermal plant, what we should do is that whatever are the physical limitations of thermal, that should be respected and adhered to. We can make them more efficient. For example, the ramp up and ramp down in thermal plants in India is not as efficient as it is in Europe.
Yeah.
Germany, for example, has been doing a lot to help Indian thermal plants. They take Indian teams from thermal plants to Germany, so et cetera, et cetera. So we need to work more there, but we have to acknowledge the limitations of thermal plant. And with that, we should have more and more space given to RE. And as I said earlier, that I mean, curtailment of RE should not be something that heavens would follow to happens. It should become a part of our planning.
Very
So
interesting.
if I could
Very
just,
interesting.
we have a paper on this that, to use your favorite word, transparency. We will get to a world of curtailment. It should be part of planning as opposed to something to shove under the rug. So in California, they have a mandate that segregates why, who, and where you're curtailing. Is it technical? Is it financial? Is it local? Is it transmission? Is it balancing? That will then help you figure out where you need to put your effort.
You know,
But sorry, just the last
sorry,
point.
Ravi. Sorry.
We will have to come up with a policy that socializes curtailment. Because this should not be based on a market mechanism, because the market is going to say it's zero. The cost of renewable at the margin is zero. it may be that I will always curtail Madhya Pradesh and not another state, or vice versa. That is not fair, and
Interesting.
it's not efficient. Curtailment will have to become a socialized public good, because it is what is keeping this entire system in balance.
That's
But no, but
fascinating.
if the DISCOM is paying for the deemed generation,
Huh.
anyway it is socialized in a manner.
Okay, do you want to, I'll give you the mic. No, good point. Please come in.
The curtailment of RE that happens is not as innocent as it looks. It's the older PPAs and the more expensive PPAs that get curtailed. There is no direct remuneration in terms of deep generation. It often gets challenged. So DISCOMs challenge it, saying it's force majeure. It typically goes into forums like the APTEL. It is time consuming, it is expensive. And then that payment comes after, say, 2 years or 3 years. It causes a working capital issue. For small generators, if a large quantum of your payment does not come within 5 months, you cannot service your debt, you go under, larger developers buy you out. And that has been the story of a lot of RE consolidation in the southern states.
Fascinating, fascinating. So that's the forced part of it. What you're hearing now is one added part to it, which is till now it has been much more in terms of, it was more expensive, not worth the DISCOM. But what you're hearing now is also, as you go on, you will have a different future in which you should be planning for curtailment all around. But if you're doing that, then the point that Rahul is making, and I think that's to me the key of this, the sophistication of policy will have to be one which is seen to be non-partisan, non-political, non-source heavy. So you can actually make decisions in a way that will satisfy, at least publicly seen, कि ये नहीं है क्योंकि ये किसी number A का project है versus number B, that the project has been
Or even
curtailed.
technical. On technical grounds, you would curtail wherever you get the maximum bang for buck or congestion value. But it may end up that it's always Madhya Pradesh or always one state
Yeah.
or one developer or one technology.
Mm.
That doesn't make sense, because they're all, you could cut any one of them to get a balancing. Why
Yeah.
only one? So that is why we need a new framework of putting it into planning, with socialization is the suggestion we've made.
Okay, one more round. Yes, someone at the back, right at the back. Then एक मिनट पहले लखिंदर सामने इसको दे दे, फिर पीछे. लखिंदर काम नहीं कर रहा है. These are very fancy systems, wireless oriented.
Hello.
Yeah.
So, good morning. My name is Vishal Toro. I'm representing Clean Energy Access Network. So, looking at the theme of this today's discussion is about road to 500 gigawatt. I have more concern on the practicality of achieving those targets. I mean, I know this is a just number, but I have more concerns on the environmental and social side of it. So, as you know, there are resources constraints. You know, 1 megawatt of solar power plant needs about 3 acres of land. Land is one of the bottlenecks. If you talk to any of the developers, they will say how much headache they have gone through in acquiring the land. So it is about community conflicts, then the local mafia nexus, all those things. So considering these things, and about the environmental issues also, like tree cutting, if you spot any GIBs in the vicinity, then whole the project gets stalled. And
GIB, just by the way, I guess this community knows, but it's the great Indian bustard.
yeah.
A bird we definitely
Correct.
don't want to lose.
Yeah. So these are the practical concerns that I want to flag out here. And Dr. Dev mentioned is about the readiness of our DISCOMs and Transco companies, whether the infrastructure is ready or not. If I am setting up, say, 100 megawatt power plant, if there is 33 or 132 kV substation availability is there or not to inject my energy. So considering all these things, do you think, what is your perspective? Can we achieve really 500 gigawatt by 2030? And there was one point mentioned about the cheaper finance availability. But nowadays, all these finance companies, be it TPGs and be it KKR, they also look at the, ESG framework related issues. So they also look into, even for renewable energy projects, they look into whether how the land is being acquired, the trees have been cut or not. So looking from the bottom up, what is your perspective? Can it be sorted out or not?
That's a perfect ending question. I will give it to all of you as I ask you for a last round of answers.
Hello.
Yes.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm Arnav from Climate Policy Initiative. So if we always talk about that, so RE is more competitive than thermal. But if we see the RE generation pattern in Indian load curve, they are totally mismatched. So to support that, we need we need battery. If we include battery in that system, the cost comes around 6 to 7 rupees per unit, which is equivalent to thermal. And also thermal gives, and also
So what's your question?
so how we, and so RE having too much RE in the system is also having some drawbacks. So how we are going to address that? Like thermal, we have to maintain the minimum 55% of PLF for the minimum operation capacity. So for that to
Okay,
retrofitting,
good,
we
good.
don't have any financing facilities to that. But if we look at European countries, say for like Germany, they have a minimum technical minimum of around 30%. And ramp up rate in India is around 3% of the capacity per minute. But if we look at around Germany or European countries, they're having 10% of capacity.
Okay.
So we are not able to finance this flexibilization of thermal assets until and unless we flexibilize thermal assets. RE integration will be a huge challenge
Okay.
because of the given intermittency. And also the transmission challenge is also there. Because if we increase the if we have suppose the 2 megawatt of solar capacity, we have to build a 2 megawatt of transmission systems. But the transmission systems won't be having 100% utilization. So the per unit cost for transmitting, now it enjoys a wave of ISTS charges, but after when the RE shares increases, that can't be cross subsidized by thermal. So we need financing to this sector also. So how we are looking towards this?
Okay. I think that if you keep, Mr. Das, I'm not right now. I'm going to ask for one last round to wrap up this part. Okay, more hands coming up. Fine. I'll come back to you. Yes, and you, and then Parth, and then अब सबके हाथ ऊपर आ रहे हैं, अब नहीं चलेगा. ये पहले मैंने बहुत मौका दिया. हाँ.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Gaurav Pandey. I have been into utility scale plants and DRE sector both. So I have a very simple question, like in the quest to development and meeting targets, are we moving too fast? Like earlier, 1 megawatt used to take around 10 acres of land, but now with the development in the module technology and all, less space is required, lesser prices, even the structure cost, the cost on the environment, like the transportation, everything is slowly reducing. So are we running too fast? That is my question.
Very good question. I mean, what you're basically saying is, let's wait for it to happen. Why are we doing it? It's a good thought issue in terms of should we wait further? Parth? I mean, it has come down in our life, my lifetime, not even most of my lifetime. It has come down from, I remember a discussion at the Prime Minister's office when we were discussing it at 22 rupees. Came down to 17, 19. Today, I'm hearing from all of you, 2 rupees, okay? I mean, the question is that Andhra Pradesh plant, which is stuck with 19 rupees for 25 years versus 2 rupees today, that's the question that is being asked. Parth.
So my question is, thank you for the fascinating discussion. And I'm working on thermal power plants as doing a research on it. So we talked about RPOs today. I really wanted to know about RGOs, which is Renewable Generation Obligation, which is for the thermal power plants, which is still not notified. If one of you could put your point of view, will it help decarbonize the thermal power plants, or what impact, because it's still not notified, what is the way forward for RGOs? Is it needed with the low rates of renewable energy we have today, or probably that won't make much sense?
So आप लोग पीछे मुझे माफ करिएगा. I've run out of time, but I have you. You had raised. It's, you know, यहाँ पर वो पहली बोली लगाने का मौका वो होता है. किसने लगाई पहली बोली?
So myself, P.L. Banerjee from Switch-On Foundation. I have a simple question about how agrovoltaics, so what policy measures are needed to scale up the agrovoltaics, and how this can be aligned with the national targets or demands?
Okay, so fascinating. I think what we needed was a whole 2 days, 3 days, 4 days with all of you because of the richness with which you have all brought in different perspectives. But you have some very interesting questions in the hall. I mean, the question of, will we get there? Question is, are we getting there? Are we trying to get there too early? Should we not wait? Okay, for the technologies to mature, cost to come down, for us to do it. There is a social issue, there is an environmental issue. Should we cut those costs? Should we build them into the system? Then the whole question of RGOs, and then, sorry, I missed your question, but essentially question of financing is what I understood it to be in today's world, if you have all this ambition in front of you. Rahul, I'm going to start with you and go across the room from here and keep it
Brief, yes.
as brief as possible with
See, if you ask me to be short, that's easy.
normal.
Yes.
Okay.
But you asked me to be brief, oh dear. So just a few quick points on the RGO. I mean, all of these things are add-ons that if your fundamentals align, I think you don't need them. A bigger question is, I mean, you used to say, oh, if only solar were cheaper. It is, you've seen that journey. If only batteries are cheaper, they will get there. It's not, are they enough for everything we want them to do? We have to ask ourselves, what are we expecting out of this RE process? And there's a lot that we can do at each level. So for today's technology, we're still behind what it can achieve for us. That last 10, 20%, that 10 hours studying, 12 hours studying, let's get to the 4 or 5 hours of studying first, for which there's enough that needs to be done. Let's figure out what's holding that back before we worry about that. Last observation, anything can be done at a cost. The thing that I would hope is this sector doesn't just socialize everything, because A, that blends who's bearing that cost, it transfers risks inefficiently or unfairly, and it also actually holds back the granularity that we need for the right types of solutions, for the right types of needs, locations, stakeholders, etc. So we need a lot more diversity of thought, diversity of policies, diversity of instruments, diversity of technologies. And that's how I think we're going to scale, as opposed to, oh, I just need this one vehicle and put my foot heavier on the accelerator. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll just touch upon those questions with respect to land and financing part of it. See, when we compare ourselves with other countries, then India is 32 countries. The land policy depends on the states. And then we have every year elections, at least every year some 2-3 state elections. Other country doesn't happen, on whom we compete or targeting or benchmarking. So that is one. See, land issue is there. Now, as somebody has said, what was the land requirement per megawatt? It has already come down. The capacity utilization, which was 11-12%, it has gone to 25-26% in solar. And in some hydro project, the PLF is 70-75%. Some we have financed in the belt of Western Odisha, Koraput and all. It is a news to me. I was not knowing that, because as I told in the beginning, 4.5 years only in RE. Now, financing, whether it is KKR, XYZ, we made 100% FDI. Who is coming here? They are not coming here for developing RE. They are coming here investing. In their economy, what is the growth rate? What is the return they are getting? Negative. Even if they are getting 0 here, still it is profitable to them. 1, 2, that is good enough for to them. Now, our economy is having that kind of sustainability. which we can ensure them 2%, 1%, 3% kind of return in the time to come. What was happening with the overseas funding with us, hedging? Now with the GIFT City coming into play, like we have opened office, we'll be starting operation there. No more hedging will be required. I'm giving just a rough indication, 350 to 450 bips. That means 3.5 से 4.5% hedging cost पे चला जाता है. Commitment charges, Government of India guarantee fees, so many things. Through that, what we can do, any developer setting up a project in India, importing the machineries and equipment, that means their capex is in foreign currency, whereas their revenue, future revenue can happen in foreign currency. We can borrow in foreign currency, lend them in foreign currency, we will not go for hedging. Like I told to Manuji, that what we lended you earlier, we were making profit, now we are making loss. That situation will not come. So then we do not have a defined green taxonomy, what I said. We have submitted a draft on that. It is going to be more than 1.5 years. So Government of India, what I came to know, it is in the advanced stage. Once it comes, then we'll know what is green actually. Then some benefit will be given to that. So these kind of things will enable us to allow cheaper funding to them. Not apart from that, today if you see the total financing, 35% of financing coming from NBFC, 15% coming from banking, and 50% coming from bond market. Despite not having a defined green taxonomy, despite not having a proper bond market with respect to green energy. So once those will be in place, we'll be having slight improvement in our bond borrowing, debt funding, whatever we are doing. And then by hedging, saving this hedging cost, we can de-risk the project, we can reduce the cost. So many initiatives from banker and lender side we are taking, and policymakers are also taking. And just think about when a new one emerging challenging, whatever policy you make, because of the lack of certainty in the sector, you have to revisit the policy again and again. And when it is revisiting the policy, policymakers means what? Government and other regulators. So changing those so fast that becomes at times time taking. And a couple of our project, in fact, because of one state's decision to degenerate PPA. See, in a common man language, I can tell it is like after marriage, you find the neighbor's spouse is more beautiful or handsome, so you think of remarrying. When you sign the PPA, the developer has already incurred all expenditure. PPA was based on that. And now you find someone is giving you cheaper, so you will do that. Then nobody will lend, no developer will come forward. So, so that now Supreme Court has given a clear mandate on that. It is fair enough. You can go. Like in divorce, we do alimony you have to give. Compensation you have to give. You compensate, you change the PPA. So those things are not going to recur again. Okay.
Thanks. So see, in our office, basically जब ये बच्चे लोग आते हैं justification के लिए, I said no use of the word solar, sustainability, poverty, nothing. That is baseline. Make a viable project. I don't want this. This is taken for granted. Please don't name any of this in the last 10 years. I don't want any presentation to have solar, renewable, anybody. The thinking process completely changed. Like the way we define the problem statement just I'm anecdotally telling two, which basically brings in the thought process. In a restaurant, in a very small restaurant, we had to put solar for her mixing machine as well as TV, and right. And what was the delta difference between her cost of economics and the bank loan was 40%, right? 40% agar cheaper ho jata, sab log bole subsidize karenge. I had another colleague who went and said, boss, her problem statement was that she has 30 people for lunch, 20 people stay outside, 20 people don't come because uska jagah nahi hai. Architect karke, usne instead of 10 people sitting at one time, 15 people sitting at it. Suddenly solar became economical.
Brilliant.
Right.
Brilliant.
Why don't we think this way? Why are we keep going on? Ali, what is the cheapest gift from here to airport? Tell me. It's walking. Why are we not walking? No, walking is the cheapest. Excel sheet mein zero aega, aapko khali beech mein khana padega. But why don't we walk? There are other costs and implications. Second thing, right? This was many years ago when electricity was really not there in many houses. What we put was solar in the schools, in the solar panels as cost of education infrastructure, battery and light at home. Battery being less than the weight of a lunchbox. The mother will say, I don't care whether you study or not, स्कूल जाओ बिकॉज मेरे को रात को लाइट चाहिए बैटरी का, बिकॉज बैटरी अगर स्कूल में चार्ज नहीं हुआ घर पे लाइट नहीं है, राइट? Where did we cheat it from? For the midday meal mechanism, right? The question third is, if you go to Tura, in Meghalaya, in West Jantia, there are 50 women who do Lakadong turmeric, right? The same kind of financing that we started to look at how airports are financed. The asset-based for airports are financed. All of us take subsidies of the airports. JFK also does not make money. The roads don't make money, but that's the subsidies we do. But when we come to the poor, CapEx gets subsidized for the 50 women, and the solar OpEx is taken as a loan. They have a completely solar powered processing center to packaging of Lakadong turmeric, right? What is the combination of airport financing and the 12th class up in America? Students get free education and breakfast up to 12th class. And how is the financial sustainability look like? That will be a tax-paying generation, which will pay for the next set of kids. Our financially sustainable, look at it, one generation, no. Now the kids of the 50 women, 250 women, I will pay for taxes, which will actually recover the cost. We are thinking in silos and we are thinking in electricity. We need to cut away from all that and think from a holistic perspective.
Very nice, very nice.
I think I would just ask the specific answer the specific question about renewable RGO. So RGO has rightly not been notified because you can't. You can be plugging something either from the procurement side or from the generation side. It doesn't make sense to do it from both sides. And moreover, there is a fundamental problem. If you look at the bundling regulations, they say that when you are scheduling the solar power, when it's bundled thermal power, the must-run doesn't apply. So if the thermal plant runs as it should, what I mentioned should run only a technical minimum during the daytime, then the solar, which is bundled, should never operate.
Interesting.
So ideally, I mean, if there is something, then it should not operate. I mean, if it's not operating in fringes, you can pass through. But here, it should, or if things are done rightly, it should never operate. So it's perhaps not a viable option. Okay. The other thing, I mean, I'll just say that perhaps there's a lot that we can do. There is a lot that we can do better than what is being done. If we do our things better, it doesn't require new technology. It doesn't require new finances. It just requires us to do things better than what are being done. And there is a lot that can be done there rather than being bothered about things that cannot be done. Perhaps if we focus better on doing what can be done, we can do far more. And what I can say is that I mean, there has to be this desire to innovate and to do things better.
Yeah.
If you do that, I mean, I've seen it with my personal experience. We've done it with a big project, with a small project, but there has to be continuous desire to do things better, and then you get rewarded by good results.
Good. Kaushik, last word.
Again, last, right?
No, I'm last.
Most unfair.
I'm last. Don't worry. I'm the last of the last.
Just a few very kind of general points to make. One on the RGO piece. I think there's another way of thinking about this is if we were to de-silo energy companies, NTPC doing solar, I think is a great idea. It does not necessarily mean that you ask them to do a certain amount of solar. That's not, and kind of having NTPC and ONGC, etc., move into doing nuclear joint ventures with NPCIL is perhaps even better because now you're teaching folks who've just gone to engineering school and stayed in that one limited environment to be able to actually think commercially. And that kind of de-siloing is really, really helpful. And that's maybe the one way we should think about making our energy companies more diversified so that they kind of think about energy in a much more holistic sense. There were lots of comments and questions about the cost of electricity from renewable energy, whether it's if you add batteries, system costs, transmission, etc. In the end, I'd kind of just go back to, I think, point that Manu made in his presentation so eloquently. If it's a project that's viable, it'll run. Doing these system-wide optimization exercises are excellent for folks like Rahul and me who get to publish reports and papers out of it. It's not really useful in terms of being able to identify actual opportunities that generate electricity or energy and then make that energy useful for someone who actually will use it.
Mm.
I love reading through the National Electricity Plan. For geeks like me, it's thing that kind of keeps us awake at night, not puts us to sleep, but is not necessarily what commercial developers and actual project developers need to focus on. This is an excellent planning exercise that allows governments to figure out how much money that they need to put out on a broad measure, at least on an annual basis or a quarterly basis or a 5-yearly basis. But these system cost analyses I find very, very interesting, but completely useless. There was a comment about are we moving too fast?
And will we get there? 2 comments, and very quickly on those 2 answers.
Just to kind of note the fact that at this point in the entire world, I think India is the only country that has the scale and the potential growth to be able to do what China did to renewable energy and EV costs or the whole variety of these sectors in the last 20 years. And if we get this right, then that flattening of the environmental Kuznets curve that we want to really do would be achievable. And if we did do this, this would be the first time in the history of the world that any country actually became more prosperous without increasing its energy or emissions footprint by very much. So we have this opportunity to, for once, be truly global leaders and not just in name and speech. So if we have an opportunity and if we can get there, by all means, we should make every effort to do that.
Okay, I think wonderful session. I know I'm little over late, but I hope we can catch up. I know people have flights out, so that's why I'm a little worried as well. But thank you very much. Thank you, every one of the speakers. Brilliant. I think what I can just end up with saying is, it's very clear to me that we will get there and we must get there. But for that, 2 imperatives, as you have heard today, are necessary. One, we need a lot more dialogue, transparency, research, discussion, and changes as we learn and relearn from what we are doing. I don't think the renewable sector has enough of that. And my real hope is that we can get back, in some senses, the excitement of the renewable, which came out of the fact that there were ways in which we were looking at how to move ahead. But the second, I think, the lesson from what Harish is saying is where the question about where we will get is also where you want to go. And I think that's the question also that we need to always keep in mind, because we can, if we change the way we do things, we can get there even faster. And I think that's really going to be the lesson for the future. But please don't make this a small versus big. Don't make this my road or the highway approach. Everything in this country is needed. We just have to make sure we can keep talking, conversing, learning, and rebooting what is not working. Thank you very much. And we will come back post-lunch. What time? 2:30. So lunch is served in the cafeteria, 2:30. Good, very interesting. I must say, I was very worried because this conversation on